the Galactic Empire, that he was part of the Rebel Alliance and let them blow him away with the Death Star. No Brits was involved, no fingers could be pointed.
You carry on taking the medication, George. Yes, I'd send all the Labour government to space with a one-way ticket and throw in the SNP for being useless. They're all a bunch of... Oh, all right, fair enough.
One person, quite frankly, I think needs to go to space.
I'm 60 this year, I'm 60 this year.
Richard Tice, did you put that cheeky bugger up to that?
I'm hoping he's going to send me the invoice because that was absolutely brilliant.
Which MP would you send to space?
Oh, no, I'll get in terrible trouble if I answer that. But it's fair to say there's quite a long list.
The sad thing is about sending people into space on a one-way ticket is I don't think that we've built a spaceship big enough to take the lunatics off this planet. I mean, from the net zero loonies to the transgender loonies to the racists to the terrorists, there is just so many to the wokerati. We need some big spaceships.
Big spaceships.
Good evening. I never know how you're going to start this conversation, Jeremy.
Katy Perry went to space today, OK? Who would you send... I'd love her to say what I wanted to, but I'd never disrespect her. Who would you send to space who could never come back?
Well, I'd be happy to send Ed Miliband to space, I think.
Oh, that is an outrageous question, so I'm not even going to answer that question.
Sam Matterface, so you get the job, yeah? Go on.
No, Sam Matterface, I tell you what, there's no.
I think David Lammy would be the person I'd want to send up in space and never come back again.
Yeah, the problem is how much would the bill be for him to munch through whatever...
Terrorists. There is just so many to the wokerati. We need some big spaceships.
Big spaceships.
Good evening. I never know how you're going to start this conversation, Jeremy.
Katy Perry went to space today, OK? Who would you send... I'd love her to say what I wanted to, but I'd never disrespect her. Who would you send to space who could never come back?
Well, I'd be happy to send...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning and welcome to Morning Glory. Coming up to 3 minutes past 6, it is the start of yet another incredible week of news that's about to come at you. It's Monday the 19th of May, of course. A very, very warm welcome to Morning Glory. I'm here with Charlie Rowley. We're going to be running through all the big stories in the papers. The big news of the day, of course, is not what you think it is. It's not the Brexit betrayal that's about to be put upon us by Keir Starmer and his merry band of cabinet ministers who have all decided that, despite the fact that they didn't really mention anything to do with resetting the European Union arrangements before the election, they think they're just going to do that now. There's a whole long list of things that they want, including, you know, travel for people under the age of 35, who apparently, according to the Labour Party, are all youths. I mean, I don't think I would be described as a youth of 35 when I was indeed 35, but we'll see what that means. Fishing rights, they want to take all those away as well. But never mind all that, because the much bigger news this morning is nothing to do with the European Union and nothing to do in a way with Keir Starmer. It's all about Gary Lineker. Gary Lineker quits BBC in hate row, is what it says on the front page of The Sun. Basically, after that dreadful, ghastly tweet that he put out and all the calls for him to resign and to be kicked out of the BBC last week, he's finally seen the light and he's finally gone. Or should we say the BBC have finally seen the light and told him to get lost, because at the end of the day, Gary Lineker has been a stain on the BBC over the course of the past 2 years. In fact, really ever since October the 7th, when Hamas decided to enter Israel and massacre, 1,400 men, women and children and do terrible things to them. Gary Lineker never mentioned the October the 7th massacre, but his first tweet was on October the 8th, talking about how terrible it was that Israel was attacking Gaza. We've got loads and loads of that to talk about this morning, but already I can tell you this is the tenant of the show. From Alan of Middlesbrough, he says, I'm currently in Kefalonia in Greece. I've just learned of Lineker's demise, a fantastic start to the week, and I'm planning on an earlier ouzo than normal to celebrate. And he says, keep up the good work that makes the likes of Mike Tapp uncomfortable. Yeah, that's another story. We'll talk about Mike Tapp a little bit later on, the hapless MP for Dover from the Labour Party. Also, of course, we'll be talking about a great many other things coming up throughout the course of the show. There's a couple of immigrant stories stories. There's loads of stuff about Joe Biden, who now apparently is suffering from a particularly aggressive form of prostate cancer. We've got all manner of things on the front pages, including, wait for this one, right? A brand new idea to set up a power station, not in the sky, not in Norfolk, not somewhere in the Antarctic. No, this one in space, where they reckon they can harness the power of the sun and beam it back down. It sounds like an episode of one of those James Bond films, doesn't it? Anyway, they say they can do it. We shall see. 0344 499 1000 is the number. We'll tell you why Elton John thinks that Peter Carr, the tech minister, as well, is a moron. Those were his words, not mine. We'll bring you more of that. Plus, of course, your views. Keep sending your voice notes in. 0344 499 1000 is the number. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. A very good morning, and a very good morning to Charlie Rowley, who's here, political commentator, of course. Charlie, good to see you.
Good morning.
We all woke up this morning, well, some of us, I suppose, were up late and so knew about it last night, to this exclusive story in The Sun. Gary Lineker, who was going to be filming his last match of the day this week, or next week, I should say, last game of the season, but was going to return to present the World Cup coverage in 2026, is now not going to return to present the World Cup coverage in 2026, and he's finally fallen on his sword, or somebody's knifed him in the back. Which is it?
Well, that's the question,
yes.
Because my original assumption reading this front page was that thank God that somebody has taken action, or the BBC have taken action,
yes.
to finally dispel him of his duties.
Yes.
Because for far too many occasions, Gary Lineker has not been on the side of what the BBC charter upholds.
He's basically done what he's wanted, hasn't he? He's just done what he liked.
He's tweeted, the BBC is supposed to be impartial in every sense. It's not supposed to be political, it's not supposed to have an opinion on political affairs, controversies that take place, but Gary Lineker has been the only person employed by the BBC and the highest paid member of the BBC that seems to have been able to get away with having an opinion, whether it's about international conflicts, whether it's about politics, and time and again, tweeting no end. He's been able to get away with it, but alas, no more. But the way,
like with all people who think that they are better than everything else, and he always thought clearly thought he was bigger than the corporation itself. He's finally been caught out, hasn't he?
Exactly, and this is the one thing: no individual is bigger than any corporation. You can be as highly paid as you are in any organisation. No individual is bigger than the brand. And the BBC is bigger than Gary Lineker. There will always be talent that can fall in behind Gary Lineker, and there will be talent that falls in behind.
There will always be.
There'll be another presenter.
He's a football presenter at the end of the day, right? I mean, he's quite good at it, and he's been very well employed by the BBC over the course of the last 15, 20 years, I suppose. But he's not God, and neither should he think that he is.
No, and Match of the Day survived before Gary Lineker. It will survive after Gary Lineker, and he wanted to go on to present the 2026 World Cup. Obviously, that won't come to pass because the BBC has got a reputation to uphold, which is to be impartial, to explain, entertain, and inform. That's its whole
I'm just
mantra.
glad to see that BBC has finally developed some kind of backbone, because the number of times that I've sat here and said that this is really the final straw, this is beyond the pale, and the last sort of act, if you like, of Gary Lineker on Twitter was to put out this dreadful tweet, which was where he basically retweeted an anti-Semitic tweet which depicted a Jewish person as a rat. And it wasn't just, people who haven't seen it, we might be able to throw it up at some point this morning, but the rat had a human face. And it was a sort of, what you might call a very, anti-Semitic cartoon-like depiction of a Jewish person with a big nose and a big chin, and it was really quite disgusting. He realised quite quickly that it was a bad idea, had it taken down, but nevertheless, then for days continued to sort of say that he was right to have his point of view. It was several days before he apologised unreservedly, because he then worked out, stupid as he is, that actually it was quite an offensive tweet, and so many people, and quite important people like Chris Philp, the Deputy Home Secretary, were calling for his resignation.
Exactly, and there'll be defendants of Gary Lineker that say that he wasn't aware, or he didn't.
Well, he should have been.
And he should have been.
Yeah.
Well, if you're as high profile a person as he is, then you should be aware.
Yeah.
And whether he was or wasn't,
Net migration needs
he
to
did
come.
delete it. But he has been more than aware of previous tweets that he's put out. He's been more than capable of having an opinion on things which the BBC have not approved of or not wanted him to talk about. But he's gone against the grain. And it's now come to pass that he has decided to leave, which I question because I understand why things are portrayed in the way that they are.
Well, it's a bit of Lineker spin, isn't it?
Look, I mean, he's been sacked.
Yeah.
In my opinion, look, the guy has overstepped the mark one too many times. And look, if you are the Director General of the BBC, who I don't know personally, Tim Davie, but I know is under always a lot of pressure. Anyone in that role is under a lot of pressure. You've got to maintain impartiality, but you've got to look at everybody in the face. Look them in the eye and say, no, I defend X decision, that decision, I defend that presenter or not, and I'll say I'll take action against him or her.
Well, and Tim Davie, last week, even as this was all still going on, I think we've got the actual Instagram post that we can see now if you're watching right here, and there it is, and it starts at the top, Zionism explained in less than 2 minutes with the picture of the rat, and it really is a disgraceful tweet that he put out, and as I say, he did realise, but he sort of hoisted his own petard in the end, isn't he, because he used to spend an awful lot of time defending his own ability to say things, and he used to say, you know, why should people care about what my opinion is, you know, but I'm allowed to have it. And everyone would say, well, no, you're not. If you work for the BBC, every other presenter is told that they're not allowed to have opinions on social media, so why should you be so special, right? But even last week, Tim Davie was in front of yet another Parliamentary Select Committee having yet another conversation about, you know, the rights and wrongs of how the BBC runs things, and he kept saying, we've got to be very careful about protecting the brand, and meanwhile, Gary Lineker's kind of off to the side, sticking two fingers up to him. So, you know, this is now where it's come to.
Well, exactly. And look, you know, he accused the Rwanda scheme, for example, when, you know, which is now the number one issue. Illegal migration into this country, illegal immigration, is the number one issue, which I think most people care about. And he described the Rwanda scheme, which the previous government set up. And look, you know, I was there, but I'm not a huge defender of it because I know there were lots of issues there. But, you know, deporting people to Rwanda, deporting people to a third country, saying to people that come into this country illegally, you will be deported to a safe hub, which now this Prime Minister wants it to be, or whether you're deporting them to Rwanda. He described it basically as the 1930s Germany, Nazi Germany.
Exactly.
He described the UK government.
And strangely, he's been very quiet on the fact that Keir Starmer is now actually looking for third countries to send people to.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
I mean, and who can forget the charming story of Gary Lineker taking in a refugee who we never saw, despite the fact that Gary Lineker takes pictures of everything that he wants you to see, and who wrote a very eloquent letter to Gary Lineker after staying with him, even though we never saw him, who talked about how wonderful it was to be treated to his hospitality, and how he thought he would be much more conservative than he was. And I'm going, no refugee has written that. I'm sorry. This has been written as a PR exercise for Gary Lineker to make himself look virtuous, because it'll all look, when people say, what are you doing about it? Well, I took in a refugee. And maybe he'll take in some more refugees. But here's what he said last week when he realised that he was in trouble, right? Because I don't think anyone who knows Gary Lineker would believe that he would voluntarily leave any organisation, right? Whilst I strongly believe in the importance of speaking out on humanitarian issues, including the tragedy unfolding in Gaza, I also know that how we do so matters. I take full responsibility for this mistake. That image does not reflect my views. Well, that's good to know, because if they did reflect your views, that would be illegal. And the one question people can't understand the answer to is that Lucy Connolly, the wife of a Tory councillor, is currently serving 31 months in prison for what was described as a hate-filled tweet that she put out. Gary Lineker hasn't even been visited by the police, and I'm not suggesting that police should visit people who make tweets, but I am suggesting there's a two-tier system going on here.
Absolutely. And Lucy Connolly, who did put out a tweet that was wrong in what she said, but hastily
But also hastily deleted,
Deleted, exactly. And is spending, as you say, 31 months.
31 months. Yeah, she had an appeal last week. I'm not sure if we've had the result of that appeal yet. I don't think we have.
No.
But, you know, there's a chance that they might, hopefully they might actually reduce the sentence. But even if they don't, she's already spent like nearly 10 months there.
Exactly. And all the while, we've had the Justice Secretary,
Shabana
Mahmood, who is the Chancellor of some such.
Well, you know the ins and outs of those flowery titles.
Who has had to deliver a press conference only a few days ago to say, oh, we're at full capacity of our prisons again. And by the way, we're going to have to let out maybe some criminals that have that are at risk to the public.
Yes, a few sex offenders.
Offenders, people that have committed
domestic
burglary,
violence.
Domestic violence.
Yeah.
But they've served enough time to which it's determined by the Justice Secretary and the Justice Department that they will be released. Whereas Lucy Connolly is no threat as an individual to the public. She said something that was wrong, that she put out on Twitter. A lot of people tweet things. A lot of people say things that they don't mean. But she hastily deleted it. But yet is serving a maximum sentence.
And was then advised by her, lawyer that she should plead guilty because then she would get out by Christmas. She pleaded guilty and she got a longer sentence than anybody ever thought she would get.
And this is on the back of the Prime Minister saying during those riots, because she tweeted that during the Southport riots, which was obviously a horrific attack. But the Prime Minister came out to say that those people were far-right enthusiasts.
Yes. Far-right thugs, I think, was the word.
Far-right thugs.
Yeah.
To which
I quite like the idea of far-right enthusiasts. It sounds like some people who get together at the weekend, go down the pub, do a bit of Morris dancing, a couple of pints of local ale.
But which
far-right enthusiasts.
But which a new report has discovered that actually those people were not far-right.
No. And they were not organised.
The Prime Minister was wrong.
Of course he was.
But yet
he hasn't apologised.
He hasn't apologised. And now all of a sudden he's going down the route of, because of the local elections and lots of people turning to reform, because they're worried about illegal migration into this country, he's now taken this whole new approach and this new tone of being a tough guy to stop the boats and stop the gangs and all of that.
Well, he's such a tough guy.
Lucy Connolly is still in prison. For a tweet, whereas he's got a Justice Secretary saying we're going to let people out again for crimes.
Well, listen, he's got a former corruption minister. He's wanted for corruption questions in Bangladesh. So I mean, that's not the worst of it. Let's face it. You've also got, let's not forget, VE Day celebrations. He invited Starmer invited a lot of people into the number 10 to help to celebrate. One of those people was Gary Lineker. Now I'm not sure of the exact timing of whether that was before or after he sent the most egregious, most recent anti-Semitic tweet, but I mean, absolute shambles. And Gary Lineker is typical of the sort of champagne socialist, wealthy, lefty, absolute and utter, degradation of our kind of society, where he's been paid a bucket load of money by the BBC and thinks he's the most important person on the planet. Well, according to The Sun this morning, he's devastated. So I would say good. I'm glad he's devastated. He should have thought about that. Good morning, Mike, says Jimbo, down here in Devon, he says. Great news that Lineker has finally gone. I would love to know how much money the boffins, a.k.a. nutters, will spend on this idea of a power station in space. Yet again, money's being thrown away when it should be used on Earth. Is Ed Miliband involved? Well, even Ed Miliband couldn't come up with this. A power station in space, which is being built by a company in Didcot. Would you believe? How much of my hard-earned cash have they thrown at Lineker's way for him to leave the BBC, says the woo-woo. Golden handshake, huge pension, same old, same old. And Jules in Camden says, good morning, Mike and Charlie. Only last week, Lineker tweeted trans people were the most persecuted on the planet, but was happy to host the Qatar World Cup. What a confused man. He is a bit confused, isn't he? Because he did go to Qatar and then made a sort of cri de coeur about how terrible it was that they had human rights abuses. He forgot to mention in his monologue at the beginning of the World Cup that he had previously been in receipt of quite a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of pounds, in fact, from the Al Jazeera TV network in Qatar.
And it's all virtue signalling. It's all... jumping on a bandwagon, but I maintain the view that nobody is bigger than an organisation, and I'm not putting Gary Lineker in the same category, of course I'm not, as people like Hugh Edwards or somebody like Philip Schofield, but big TV presenters, big personalities, people that are on our TV screens or in public life throughout. Nobody is bigger than the organisation. Everybody can be replaced. Gary Lineker will be replaced. And there'll be some young buck that comes through. It might have been Jermaine Genius, obviously not now, but it could be, and it could be someone that we'd never heard of, but will take us all by surprise and storm, and we will love them no end. But we will not regret. I don't think we won't. We won't miss it, will we? We won't miss Gary Lineker for too long. He's done a great service as a sports presenter. I love football. I mean, believe it or not, I'm an Arsenal fan.
Yeah,
I was at Arsenal yesterday. Yeah. And he's done great things for Match of the Day. He's done great things for football. But his politics has been something that he should have kept to himself.
It's meant that the end of his career is unfortunate for him.
It's brought the BBC into disrepute.
It's brought the BBC into disrepute. It's also brought himself into disrepute. We'll come back to it, though, so we've got to stop. Let's get a voice note from James.
Good morning, Mike. Now, when are we ever going to find a Prime Minister with a pair of... Once we do find one, start using them. You've got to turn these boats around now. I keep saying it. I've said it for a long, long time now. Stop these people coming here. And my biggest fear, Mike, there'll be a civil war. People are going to come down and try and stop them. But you can't blame them, Mike. I mean, like I say, a lot of good people, most people in this country work very hard, long hours now. And what do they get? Absolutely nothing. Diddly squat. And these people coming over here, free dental care, free driving lessons, free hotels, free food. Unbelievable, Mike. Anyway, morning glory, best breakfast show on the planet.
Good man, James, thank you very much indeed. Yeah, they get free everything. What we don't get, though, is freedom of speech, do we, of course? You know, that's not reserved for us. It's 21 minutes past 6. We've got loads more coming up on Morning Glory.
During the Cold War, in the 1980s, we had something called the Home Service Force. And there were groups of them around the country, and their job was to defend key installations, communication centres, power nodes, radar stations, things like that. But it looks as if they're talking about reviving some version of that. So the old thing about there's nothing new under the sun, we actually had this, you know, in the Cold War 40 years ago, and it worked quite well.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 6:23. I'm Mike Graham, and it is a beautiful day out there. I mean, maybe not as great as it was at the weekend, but it will get up to about 20 degrees today, so we're looking forward to a bit more kind of, you know, early summery sort of type behaviour. We shall see. We've got Charlie Rowley here with us at the moment, and I don't know how excited you are about the EU reset, Charlie, but let's not forget, people voted in 2016 to leave the European Union. Keir Starmer this morning begins what the Sun calls the Great Brexit Betrayal, where he's going to try and drag us back into it.
Well, exactly. He'll say it's a reset. The Tories are saying it's the Starmer surrender.
Yes.
I think
I think the Tories have got it right, to be fair, because it's, the way it looks, the things that he's offering up in order to get this reset done are all things which we didn't want to have.
Well, I think if you take a big thing and a small thing, and I say this in very simple terms. So, you know, a small thing being, as part of this negotiation, that UK passengers, if they're going to EU countries, they can, as part of this EU New Deal, reset, whatever you want to call it, that they will be able to pass through the e-gates as you would normally, having to, as opposed to having what we have to do now is if we go to an EU country, have to go and queue in the long queues.
Have you ever queued in an EU country for longer than you used to? Since we left the European Union? Because I haven't.
Do you know what? I haven't.
No, and I'll tell you why that is. Because when you go to most European countries, if you go, depending on how big the airport is, they don't have e-gates, right? There's no such thing as e-gates. I mean, if you've ever flown into, you know, Paphos, if you've ever flown into some of the smaller airports in Greece, you know, you don't necessarily have e-gates, one. But also, two, all the EU passengers are in a big queue, because there's more of them than there are of us, because we're the only people in the other queue. So actually the other queue, which is not the EU queue, is better. So this is a complete shibboleth to me. Let's have e-gates that we can go through. Doesn't matter.
Well, well, that's interesting, because it struck me that because I thought, as a sense of goodwill, having left the EU, that the UK had said to EU passengers coming into the UK, you could still come through your normal gates. So basically, you wouldn't have to be part of those long queues. Whereas the EU said to UK passengers entering the EU, you've got to go through what is not.
Yes, no, I accept that. But what I'm saying is that the actual effect of that is that you get through quicker. Because if you arrive, say, for example, in somewhere like Faro, which is quite a busy airport, you've got an awful lot of people flying down there to play golf from Germany, from France, from all sorts of European countries. And if you're British, you don't go have to wait behind all them. You just go in your own queue.
Well, that slightly undermined my argument, because
it does.
because I was about to say, well, hold on about, you know, why on earth has the UK said to the EU, having left the EU, that we're prepared to say to EU passengers, you can still have all the flexibility of getting through the airport quite quickly, relatively quickly, where the EU has treated UK passengers as second-class citizens.
But that's always been the case, you see. Ever since Brexit happened, the EU's been spiteful, the EU has been deliberately difficult, not just on that question, but on trade, on food standards, on all manner of things, on many bits of red tape that they could have easily done away with. Like, for example, the ridiculous ruling about, well, you can only now come here for 3 months. Everyone who had a house on the continent was punished, basically, because they couldn't go there when they wanted. Similarly, people couldn't take their animals with the same regularity. None of that needed to be done.
No.
But they did it because they didn't like the fact that we'd left.
Exactly. And so this is why I think people, or the Prime Minister, will obviously talk this deal up. Well,
he hasn't got one yet, by the sounds of it.
Well, he hasn't got one, and we'll have to wait until after, I think, 2:30, 3 o'clock this afternoon. But and when all the summit has been sort of...
Well, we shall see. But I'll tell you what, let's have a look at Nick Thomas Simmons, right, who's part of the worst negotiating team in the history of the planet. And by that, I mean anyone in the Labour government. They don't seem to know how to negotiate anything at all. You wouldn't want to send them down to your local car boot sale and say, can you find me an old copy of Monopoly? I'm going to play it to the kids. We come back and say, yeah, we got one. We only paid 300 quid for it. Here he is on Laura Kunsberg.
It's about young British people as well, having opportunities to be able to work, to live, to experience different cultures. But that control is hugely important, and it will be absolutely consistent with the objective the government set out in its migration white paper last week to reduce... Let me finish this point, it's important. It is to reduce the level of net migration. That is the objective we set out last week. Net migration quadrupled between 2019 and 2023 to nearly 1 million. We've said that is way too high. So anything agreed on youth mobility will be consistent with lowering the level of net migration.
I'm not quite sure how he makes the argument that by letting in more people, there will be less people being let in. It doesn't make any sense. Also, by the way, you don't have to go to Europe to experience cultural differences. You just stay in Britain, because they're all coming here. You know,
well,
you want to experience a cultural difference, then take a walk down the street.
It called me a cynic and a form of it, but it'll only be consistent with bringing down the numbers if you exclude then the numbers of this EU mobility scheme of students coming from abroad into the UK. And look, on its own, personally, Mike, I've got no problem with UK students, people under 30, having a time of their lives going into EU countries to...
Yeah, but you know who's going to be doing that. It's just the posh kids that are going to be doing it. Only kids who've got parents who can afford to support them by going to a foreign country. Those are the people that go. All this kind of waving around of, you know, isn't it great that we've got so many, you know, well-educated children who can go and spend some time. I mean, there was a woman, I think she was a Labour MP yesterday on Laura Kunsberg, who said, oh yes, I had a great time pulling pints in Germany.
Yes.
You know, oh great, well, very, very happy for you. But, you know, you wouldn't be able to do that if your parents didn't have money.
No, quite. And but I'm all for it. But however, you've got to read the room. And now is not the time when you were trying to bring down, when so many consistent governments, and it was the Tory government for a long time that said that they were going to bring migration down to the tens of thousands. They didn't. Completely failed. And that's why people have turned their backs against the Tories and didn't even endorse Labour because there was such a low turnout, but they wanted to anything but the Tories. And that's why Reform are doing so well, because now they're saying that this Labour government is a bit of a sham, so they're looking for an alternative. But
you can't stand there with the door open going, we're stopping immigration. You just can't do it.
Exactly. So I think this whole EU youth mobility thing is a bit of a red herring. But the way that the EU you've just got to wake up and think, you know, how are we being treated? And so if we have let
That's why we left. Because they
why
treated us badly when we were in it, and now they treat us badly when we left it. So why does he want to go back in?
So if you're a UK student today...
You have to be a lunatic.
Well, quite right. If you're doing your GCSEs this week, which I think in the last 2 weeks... So people are doing their GCSEs this week, people would be doing their A-levels, getting up to their exam period, and they'll be thinking, right, if I want to go to university, you don't have to go to university because there are so many other options, but if you want to go to university, you're going to pay a UK fee of about between £3,000 and £9,000.
It's not between 3 and 9,000. It's 9,000.
Well,
that's like saying, you know, when this was the other great Cameronism, wasn't it? But if you want to charge £9,000 for lecturing fees, for tuition fees, you can. So everyone went, okay, what price is it? 9,000. That's what they charge.
But that's as a UK student. As an international student, as a European student, you would be paying an international fee, which was
higher,
which was much higher, much higher. I would imagine. I think it's about 15.
It was 15 to 20,
15 to 20,000. Now, as part of this deal, if you're an EU student, you'll be coming to the UK to pay the same fee as a UK student. So, what does it say to a young Brit that? If you go to university, and I say that's not the answer to everything, but if you want to go to university as a British person to study at a British university, you are going to be paying the same fee as somebody coming from abroad. Because the EU have demanded, or as part of the
exactly. The whole thing is a nonsense.
Totally
Let's
wrong.
have a look. Let's have a look at what Trevor Phillips had to say to young Mr. Thomas Simmons.
Net migration needs to come down. So that's why this is not an approach that we are looking for.
So no youth mobility scheme?
That's not the right starting point for us at all, because what we need to do is to bring net migration down.
So if you get a youth mobility scheme in this agreement, when is Yvette Cooper going to resign?
Yvette Cooper is doing an absolutely fantastic job as...
Yeah, but she's not doing the job that... You're not doing the job she wants you to do, which is, this is not an approach.
No, we've said we would listen to sensible EU proposals.
She just said this is not an approach we want.
No, what Yvette Cooper is saying there, and is absolutely the policy of the government, is that we are going to reduce the level of net migration.
Yes. Bit of confusion inside the cabinet by the looks of things.
Yes, Yvette Cooper was quite clear there and said that she wasn't that the EU youth mobility scheme was not the right answer.
No, it's the wrong approach.
And so she's been overruled. And I tell you why she's been overruled, because the Treasury are clearly trying to get any kind of
They're literally grasping at anything. Grasping at straws.
Exactly.
It's desperation for Starmer. We'll come back with more on that. Let's get a voice note from Glenn.
Morning, Mike. Glenn from Suffolk here. With regards to Lineker, oh, what a plank. I mean, two main things for me stand out about this. He's got an ego the size of a planet. He thinks he's more important than everyone else. And the second thing is, I actually think he's as thick as custard. I mean, how stupid is that man? I mean, for God's sake, he's never lived the real life. He's never lived a normal life. He just doesn't know how the rest of us feel. Have a great one. Take care.
Thank you very much indeed, Glenn. Yeah, of course he doesn't. I mean, he's been working for the BBC, I was just saying, since about 1999. So the best part of the last 25, 26 years, longer than he was a professional footballer for. And he was a very good professional footballer, and he played for his country, and you can't take away his footballing career. But he has completely and utterly, I think, sort of soiled his broadcasting career, because at the end of the day, he's behaved disgracefully. And he didn't listen, and he wouldn't listen to anyone who said that, you know, you've got no right to say these things if you want to work for the BBC. And, you know, I'm not sorry that he's now kind of shamed himself into the situation he's in. But we'll come back to that. Coming up, we're going to speak to Ryan Harris over in the US. We want to talk about Joe Biden. We want to talk about that Mexican ship that crashed into the Brooklyn Bridge spectacularly, in killing several people. Unbelievable stuff at 6:34.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 6:37. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through, of course, until 10 o'clock. 4 glorious hours of Morning Glory every single weekday morning. Charlie Rowley's here as well. We've got plenty to talk about, including the Princess of Wales, by the way, who's come out and decided that it'd be a great idea if every man who becomes a father gets 6 months off for paternity leave. Huh? Really? I mean, much respect to the Princess of Wales, I must say, but this is maybe one that she should not particularly get involved in. But let's go over to the United States of America and talk to Ryan Harris, US journalist and reporter. Just briefly, Ryan, sorry to keep you waiting. We're in a bit of a rush this morning. There's a lot going on here. But Joe Biden, it was announced late last night here that he's suffering from a very aggressive form of prostate cancer. I believe we've got a clip from 2022 in which he admitted to having cancer. Let's have a look.
And because it was a 4-lane highway that was accessible, my mother drove us, and rather than us be able to walk. And guess what? The first frost, you knew what was happening. You had to put on your windshield wipers to get literally the oil slick off the window. That's why I and so damn many other people I grew up have cancer. And why can't, for the longest time, Delaware had the highest cancer rate in the nation.
Now, that particular video has gone viral, apparently, I'm told, Ryan. Very good morning to you. It's an unusual story, this, isn't it?
Yeah, and, you know, the timing of it is rather strange because, you know, it's no secret that Donald Trump continues to, while he is in the White House, rail on Joe Biden and continue to blame him for all the problems that our country is facing. But there's also a book coming out by Jake Tapper of CNN and Alex Thompson of Axios on Tuesday about the supposed cover-up in the White House in terms of, you know, Biden's health and his mental acuity, and, you know, people sort of again, covering up for him, so that he could continue and at least finish out the last term. And then Joe Biden and Jill Biden last week appeared on The View on ABC, and there was a couple of times apparently where Mrs. Biden, stepped in and answered some of the questions on his behalf.
Right.
So at the very least, a rough week for Joe Biden, but
and also a rough week as well for all those people who defended him when it was very clear to most sensible people that he was not in a very good place in terms of his cognitive abilities. And I believe the book also says that basically Jill Biden was running the White House.
For the most part. I mean, and it wouldn't be unprecedented. It's no secret that when Woodrow Wilson had a stroke, that Edith Wilson was running the White House, and that goes back to the 1920s, so a century ago. But, not that that's an excuse for it, but that it has certainly happened before. And, of course, there are others who have been around Joe Biden, and not necessarily those who have worked for him. I heard a reporter say, he was with Joe Biden on several occasions, and he felt that the president was, pretty sharp mentally. But we also know that when you get to be a guy President Biden's age, some days are good and some days are bad. And
I don't think there's any doubt, though, there's no doubt, Ryan, that there was a cover-up in terms of the way that some in the media didn't want the report to say that Joe Biden wasn't very well. I mean, we all could see for ourselves. We saw him tripping up. We saw him looking lost on stage. We saw him falling down flat on his face. We saw him tripping up, Air Force One steps, and yet people were at pains to point out that, he's absolutely fine. I mean, even our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, came back from a meeting with him and said he's never seen him in better health, shortly before he announced that he wasn't running for president.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing to keep in mind. So many people who had been around him, whether it's Mr. Starmer or the people that are, in Joe Biden's immediate circle and were in the White House, definitely went to great pains to try to make it look like he was still on top of things.
Yeah, he absolutely did. Listen, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Ryan Harris there reporting into us from the US of A, because we've got so much to do this morning. Charlie Rowley's here. A couple of very interesting messages just come in. Let's be positive, says Sean. Today, Keith Starlin will announce his surrender to the EU and ensure we have a reform government with Nigel Farage as Prime Minister after the next general election. And, of course, reform. And indeed, so have the Tories vowed to, if this is something that Starmer does, completely and utterly reverse it as soon as they get into power.
Well, let's talk up the positives as the Prime Minister will try and set out this evening. Let me try and...
Luckily, we haven't got much time, so can you give me the positives in about 30 seconds or less?
So he'll say that, look, if you're an if you're a UK passenger, you will be able to go through passports.
Oh, yeah,
in
the gate.
EU.
The trouble is nobody's got any money. They can't afford to go on holiday.
On your summer holidays, you'll be able to see.
Can't afford them.
You'll be able to get through. If you can't, as you currently can't, you can't export meat or meats and sausages and things like that.
Yes, free the sausages.
Free the sausages.
Right.
They can now go to the EU. However,
they don't want our sausages in the EU.
Well, however, all of those transitions will now be subject to EU jurisdiction. So it won't be, if there is a dispute between a British sausage going into the EU market, who's going to be the arbiter? It's going to be the
French.
EU.
Yeah, of course.
The French.
As always.
Exactly. It's not going to be the UK that has any kind of say at all. We're going to have to suck it up and say,
the same same old. I mean, I can't believe that Starmer's fallen for it, because he's such an ideologue, because let's not forget, for those who don't remember...
He wanted a second referendum.
He wanted a second referendum. He was the shadow Brexit secretary who railed and railed against Brexit and said it was wrong. And I don't think there's one member of the Labour cabinet currently who voted to leave. So they're all Remainers, right? And so they've never given up on this sort of dream. I mean, Starmer's never happened. We're going to talk to Harry Cole later on in the show. He's got a great column in The Sun today in which he says, Keir Starmer loves jumping into bed with everybody from all over the world, as long as it keeps him away from his domestic policies, because his domestic policies are woeful and they're falling down around his ears. I mean, we're going to play you a clip in the next section of Elton John calling a government minister a moron. That's how well they're doing. Unbelievable. And he not only voted for them, he raised funds for them. This is good from Heather in Bingley. I believe Keir Starmer has been a Russian sleeper for many years, placed here to destroy the United Kingdom. The plan is definitely working. We are being destroyed. And Mark in Caterham says, Mike, the British youth don't want to work in the UK, so even less chance they want to head to Germany to work. Complete and utter nonsense. This is the thing. I mean, it's incredible. One from Julian. Morning, all. Starmer is working flat out to nauseate the British population. He's making a fine job of it. Never before have we seen such nauseating behaviour from a joker Prime Minister and his rabble of jesters. Whoever wins the next general election will spend years unpicking this toxic web Labour are weaving. I mean, I've never seen such vitriol about a government that's only been in for less than a year. I've just never seen anything like it.
Well, I think
people hate them.
I think that's absolutely right, because I think they totally misjudged the majority that they came in on. And so, yes, they've got a huge majority, bigger than what Boris had in 2019, but on such
but hardly anyone voted for them.
Exactly, such a low turnout. But the Labour Party, the Labour left, took that as a sort of some sort of huge wave that they came in on. All the country voted them in their drones. So therefore they could do anything, that they're untouchable.
Yeah.
And they've got a Prime Minister who has just treaded water because he hasn't got a political bone in his body.
No.
All of a sudden he's turned up to say, well, now that we've got a huge majority, we can basically do whatever we want, however harsh those decisions are, but don't worry, because we can just blame the last lot that we're in, and that means like taking away winter fuel allowance, that means like attacking our farmers, that means, and all of a sudden people have realised, a bit too late, and they should have realised from the start that you can't do that because you've come unstuck.
Yeah,
because
they've
those
come
are the
unstuck
wrong
in
decisions.
every single area of policy.
There's no strategy.
Yeah.
And saying to the country, we're not going to raise national insurance contributions, VAT, or income tax, to then all of a sudden say, oh, we might just have to increase national insurance contributions.
We didn't see any of this coming.
But we didn't say it about business, did we? We didn't say we would do it for business.
No.
And they raised that. The bedrock of our society, the bedrock of our economy is small, medium-sized businesses, and therefore there's a tax on them, not just national insurance contributions, but it's business rates and an increase in the minimum wage, which is the right thing
I'm sorry
to do.
to break this to you, Charlie, but you haven't been very positive in your section on let's talk about the
Sorry,
positives.
I did say that, didn't I?
You've gone completely negative. Nothing at all. Now, look at this. This is from Lucy Harris. She used to be an MEP. Said this last night, which I think is really interesting,
Lucy.
right?
I like Lucy.
She says, let's be honest, the reason Labour is selling us out to the EU is not just because of the ideology of their leadership, but because they don't want the responsibility of managing a country. They're scared, confused, and grasping for someone to tell them what to do. I think that's spot on.
She's right.
Absolutely spot on. Let's get a voice note from Perry.
Morning, Mike. Going back, so 1 year before the general election till 1 year after they've actually won, so we're looking at 2 years now. Have you got anything in the archives where Keir Starmer actually told the truth? Because I'm thinking WASPy women, pensioners, farmers, electric bills, community tax, joining the EU, immigration, smashing the gangs. I can't think of one thing where he's actually told the truth. Can you have a look through the archives just so I can prove myself wrong? Thank you.
Well, do you know, Perry, it's interesting you say that, because we did find one last Monday when he made his big speech about immigration. We found a true clip from 2020 in which he said that we must talk up the benefits of migration. And I think that's what he really thinks, and that's what I think he really means. And we'll probably find another one on his views on the EU, which is that he really wants to rejoin it. 6:47.
During the Cold War, in the 1980s, we had something called the Home Service Force. And there were groups of them around the country, and their job was to defend key installations, communication centres, power nodes, radar stations, things like that. But it looks as if they're talking about reviving some version of that. So the old thing about there's nothing new under the sun, we actually had this, you know, in the Cold War 40 years ago, and it worked quite well.
I don't think the Prime Minister believes in lower immigration at all, but because it's politically expedient for him, he's now arguing for it.
He's just brought forward an awful lot of policies that say that he does want immigration to be lowered. You may question his belief, but no, we can't question his actions, can we?
Well, yeah, we can, because actually we offered him options during the immigration bill to go much further, to bring in a hard legal cap on the number of work visas that would be given out
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 10 minutes to 7. Charlie Rowley's here with us. Gareth in Exeter says, morning, Mike. So with Starmer accepting the EU rules on food, does that usurp the trade deal done with the USA? Surely this would throw this into doubt, and hence increased tariffs from Trump may follow for the United Kingdom. Sonia, there's no end to some of these messages, by the way. Starmer should be branded a traitor. He has totally ignored the Democratic vote to leave the EU. He should be stripped of his position, and all his Labour MPs who think they can dictate to us, the British population. Absolutely right. Let's have a look at what Elton John thinks of this government. He was on TV yesterday with Laura Kunsberg again on the BBC, talking about this incredible sort of oncoming onslaught of AI, which an awful lot of the creative industries are running against, and he's one of the people leading the charge. Have a look.
We're complaining about people's legacy, when they're creative, and it comes from the human soul and not a machine, because a machine isn't capable of writing anything with any soul in it. If you've got to get rid of that, and you've got to rob young people of their legacy and their income, it's a criminal offence, I think. I think the government are just being absolute losers, and I'm very angry about it, as you can tell. Big tech has so much money. And if you're a young person, you're fighting big tech, good luck. It's really disrespectful. It's really disheartening. I supported the government. I did a thing for them at St Paul's Cathedral when the Keir Starmer said, I want to help young people in the music business. I want to support them. Well, he's not doing it. And I did that show, and I did it because I believed, but I'm not believing so much now. I mean, if it takes going to the court or whatever, we will fight this. And the government are being so stupid. I don't know who the tech minister is. What's his name?
Peter Kyle.
Yeah, well, he's a bit of a moron, sorry.
I mean, I think Elton John speaks for the nation, as he always does. Dame Elton, as we like to call him. I mean, God bless him.
I think he does. And look, you know, the whole issue here is that AI could effectively, as it progresses with AI, could take an artist's work. Yeah. It could modify it in some way, but take the premise of it and use it as its own.
Well, he's arguing that,
or
you know,
use it against you could get AI to write a song in the style of Elton John, or write a book, you know, or a play, in that case of James Graham, you know, or write a musical like Andrew Lloyd Webber, or write, you know, write a newspaper article like Charlie Rowley, you know, or do a radio show like Mike Graham. I mean, of course they couldn't do that, but you know, your programme would sell a lot more than my article.
Well, all I'm saying, what I say to these AI people is, I don't know how they're going to make me, you know, into an AI bot, because even I don't know what I'm going to say before I say it, so I don't know how they're going to know what to say. But it is an important story, and Elton John's very fired up about it.
Well, totally, because and I can understand, because everybody views artists and singers, even, you know, people like Jessie J and you know, Rihanna and Taylor Swift, as if they're just, you know, they've plucked out of thin as if they're just from school. They're actually trained singers. These people that have studied
They've
music.
worked really hard.
Elton John was a classical pianist.
Of course.
Went through the
and also,
Royal College of
as he
Music.
said yesterday, most of the people who are going to be affected badly by this are not the sort of rock superstars. They're not the Taylor Swift of this world, but they're the people who are just struggling to make it from one week to the next, trying to play in a band or trying, you know, those are the people who will suffer. Ordinary journalists who are trying to make a crust, you know, ordinary people trying to write plays, all of that. He's got a point. And of course, the worry is that Peter Carl has sold out already to the big tech companies. I was reading a piece just last week that said that he's had myriad numbers of meetings with people from Facebook and from other social media enterprises, TikTok possibly as well, over time, because the worry is that he will sort of fold and not be very hard on the tech industry and let them walk all over him again, like all other negotiators in the Labour government.
Totally right, and I think, look, you know, AI can have such a positive way of how we operate in the world, whether it's in the healthcare sector. I'm sure
there's lots of good things it can do.
No, exactly, but I think we overestimate and we compensate. Compensate. Yeah, we put all of our eggs in that positive basket, and not look at child exploitation.
Yeah.
Look at online harms for young people.
And we know the tech companies don't give monkeys about any of that stuff.
They don't give a monkeys.
They don't stop any of it from happening.
And they can, and they should, and they should be held to account.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they are because technology is such a big and fascinating and wonderful thing, and the future that they get away with it. So until you stop the harms. In that sense, for children, then of course, if you're just a musician...
I think it's time that the government's got to grips with all of it and just said, look, it's all very well talking about, you know, the free nature of the internet and the fact that, you know, it's supposed to be an uncensored, you know, playground for everybody to do what they want. That's really not worked out terribly well. So maybe there's a time for a different approach.
Quite right.
But why should I give them any ideas? You know, they don't pay me enough for that. So they'll have to consult with me on a more professional basis. A couple of things to talk about. The Pope on the front page of the Times, Pope Leo out in the Pope-mobile for the first time. I think we've got some footage of Angela Rayner meeting him, who was apparently, along with Prince Edward, there she is. I don't know if she thinks there's a funeral at the Vatican. She seems to have come all dressed in black. You know, hello, Pope. Yeah, very nice to see you. Yeah, my name's Angela. Yeah, why are you wearing black? Oh, I thought it was a church thing. You don't have to wear black just because you're in a church, Ange. Come on.
Yes.
Now, also, a couple of stories to mention to you. The Princess of Wales has inspired one of Britain's leading businesses to give new fathers 6 months off fully paid maternity leave. Now, I like the Princess of Wales. I think she's a very fine woman. I think she and her husband, you know, the future king, will be a marvellous sort of royal couple to run this country when they eventually get to do it. But I really don't think she's got any business telling businesses to give people 6 months off for having a baby. Do you?
Well,
this will be a challenge for you, won't it?
This could be I have no intention of having kids, and so I've got no skin in the game. But
Well, you have if you're working in a company where the guy next to you who's had a kid is off for 6 months, and you've got to do half of his work.
Yes, but I think I want dads to be more involved in the upbringing of their kids.
Yeah.
In their early years.
Yeah,
in
but
their
you don't
early
need 6 months
stages.
off to do that.
Well, but mums have. If you're the paternal mother, you have 9 months off. You can have up to a year off.
I think it depends on the company you work for. I don't think you don't get 9 months off with full pay. I think there are various stages of it. And I think the point is, for a woman to choose to have a child is a very important choice that a woman makes. Some women make it, some women don't make it. But I don't think you should be entitled as a man who does not have to really do anything for a child to be born, apart from, you know, a bit of, you know, amusement of an evening. You basically go back to work. You can have a couple of weeks off and go back to work. And let me tell you, a lot of men would be more than happy with that.
Well, I think I think dads would rather be in work.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point.
But I do think there should be...
I took 2 weeks off for one of my kids being born and went back after a week. I'd had enough.
Well, I think it's actually. I think William had 6 weeks off for Charlotte, 2 weeks off for
very nice
George,
for him. Very nice for him. But, you know, I just think it's quite a contentious area. We've got enough problems with people working from home. Then we'll start giving people even more time off when we're supposed to be looking for people to make the country grow. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, in an ideal world, I would like to see maybe a split parental leave, but I don't know how you would monitor it.
I think if you work,
if the mum's got one job and the dad's got another,
if you work in a firm where they can work it out, great. But I just think making anything mandatory for companies is a bad idea.
Oh yeah, mandatory. I wouldn't go down that path.
As a general idea.
No.
Okay. And finally, this ridiculous idea of a sort of a power station in the sky, or sorry, not in the sky, in space, where they're going to beam power down to the Earth. It sounds, as somebody pointed out, I think it's David from Wigan, he says any power station I've ever known in space was called a Death Star. Which, anyway, listen, we're out of time. Charlie Rowley, very good to see you. He says, yeah, with Kia flip-flop Starmer acting like the Emperor, it just shows you how correct that storyline in the film was. Cheers, mate. Have a great day. Thank you, Damon. Thank you, Charlie. We've got loads more to do, lots more stories to do. The Great British Brexit Betrayal is underway. Keir Starmer's inviting half of Europe, probably all of Europe, into Downing Street this morning. We'll be back after this.
Ed Miliband to space.
How much, ladies and gentlemen, are fish and chips where you come from? We'll go to Jason in Crewe.
Jason from Crewe, fish, chips and peas, £7.50. It's the best chippy in England.
Janice in Leeds, go.
Regarding fish and chips, in Leeds it's between £9.50 and £12.75.
Whitby, how much is fish and chips?
3 of us, fish, chips, peas, I think one of us curry sauce, 3 cans of pop, just short of 70 quid.
£70? That's 23 quid a head, man. Even my maths does that. Very quickly, a voice note. Campbell in Scotland, go.
Up here in Banff in the northeast of Scotland, we can get a fillet and a half of haddock with a regular chips for £8 and 10 pence, and it's by far and away one of the best chippies I've ever had.
Kenneth in Surrey, fish and chips, go.
Fish and chips in Ascot, about half a mile from where you used to live, will cost you £12 and 60 pence. Great show. Keep up the good work.
That's why I moved, because you were living there. When was the last time you had fish and chips?
Couple of weeks
How
ago.
much? Where'd you get it from?
I think it was about 40 quid. It was in the Ivy.
Honestly, you really are. For any of you who think he's a man of the people, I nearly said you're a...
Keeping it real.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 3 minutes past 7. I'm Mike Graham, with you all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course. According to the BBC's report on Lineker's departure, even better news, says Lynn in North Yorkshire, he's not planning to do any more telly, but is sadly going into politics. I have a suspicion he won't accept an invitation to speak on Morning Glory, though. Hope springs eternal. Well, you never know, do you? Gary Lineker going into politics, I think you'll find it's a little bit more difficult than sitting on your own, pontificating and making out that you know best and everybody else doesn't know anything at all, because that's not really how it works. Let's get a voice note from Damon.
Morning, Mike. Damon from Wigan. So today is the day where Keir Starmer betrays all Brits and turns his back on the UK. I don't know how this is physically possible. I don't know what the guy is thinking, but I was one of those who voted to leave, and I am absolutely appalled that he'll be allowed to get away with this for the next 4 years. Nigel Farage will have years upon years of trying to undo every deal this clown makes. And as regards the story of a power station in space, the only one I've ever known is the Death Star. And with Keir Starmer acting like the Emperor, that story in Star Wars was absolutely spot on about the future of Britain. Cheers, Mike. Have a nice day.
David, thank you very much indeed. You've planted the seed in his mind now. He couldn't make the Death Star, could he? He wouldn't make it work. He's not exactly Darth Vader, is he? He's more like, I don't know, I'll come up with some other name that will be just as insulting. EU's fishing demands pose late threat to deal, is what it says on the front page of the Times, because, of course, they were apparently talking late into the night. They're supposed to be making an arrangement and an announcement at some point this morning about a new deal that's being done with the European Union, but apparently they still haven't done it. Well, we would rather they didn't do it at all, thanks very much indeed, particularly if it means that allowing Britain access to defence money, which might be doing the rounds in Europe, being sort of supposedly dependent upon us giving away more fishing rights for the next 10 years. I don't think so. Not on your Nelly, I think would be the question I would be saying. Meanwhile, front page of The Sun, Gary Lineker quits BBC in hate row. Finally, the BBC have seen sense and told him to hop it. So Gary Lineker will make his final appearance on Match of the Day this weekend coming, and he will no longer darken our doors on the BBC. He will not be presenting any longer the 2026 World Cup, which is what he thought he would be doing, because he has made a complete and utter dog's breakfast of his own career. Finally, he overstepped the mark so much that even the BBC couldn't take it. He was anti-Semitic. He put an anti-Semitic tweet out. He's apologised unreservedly for it. He says he didn't realise quite how bad it was. Well, even if you give him the benefit of the doubt, finally, we have seen the back of Gary Lineker, so I think there'll be a lot of people rejoicing about that. Also, we'll be telling you coming up over the course of the next few hours exactly what's going on inside the good ship UK, because it turns out foreign offenders are going to be immediately deported according to a recommendation, and more Labour bad news. 13,000 pupils left private school in the last year alone. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. How about this from Judith, who says, "Good morning, Mike. I just wanted to thank you and the Talk team for all you've done in bringing awareness of the dangers of Gary Lineker to the public. It's because of news outlets like you that he hasn't got away with his disgusting anti-Semitic behaviour. Finally, there's some justice for this, and a new day will rise." Have a great day. Lots of love from Jerusalem in Israel. Judith, I'm very, very happy to do so. Thank you very much indeed, and thanks for listening. It's time for this country to stop the nonsense of trying to be politically correct and start calling things as they are. There's a difference between a refugee and an illegal migrant. End of. Gary Lineker had neither. Yeah, exactly right. Absolutely true. Let's talk to Will Kingston, political commentator, right now, because there's an awful lot to discuss, Will, and I guess we should kick off, if you don't mind, before we get stuck into Labour in the EU, with a toast to the end of Gary Lineker.
Yeah, that's right. G'day, Mike. Julie's calling in from Jerusalem. I'm reporting in from the colonies this morning. Isn't technology wonderful that we can connect with the furthest reaches of the empire?
It is.
Yeah, look, the thing which has always been annoying about Gary Lineker is he's always thought he's a bit smarter than he actually is.
Yeah.
And he's never really recognised that his job is to talk about blooming football.
Yeah.
You know, I think so many people, the thing that annoys people, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, what you think about conflicts in the Middle East, is when it comes to football, your job is to talk about football. People want sports separated from the onerousness that we get from politics in every other part of our life.
Yeah.
Just focus on the football. And that's particularly the case when you've got a job at the BBC in which you have a statutory obligation to be impartial. So, you know, as I imagine every person listening to this will agree with me, good riddance to bad rubbish.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the problem. He just wouldn't listen. You know, he had time and time again an opportunity to rein it in. You know, he was given a couple of warnings. The BBC always folded under the sort of pressure. But he just, as it's been written about by many decent journalists in this country, he was getting more and more sort of radicalised almost online by what he was seeing, because he was refusing, quite frankly, to see anything two-sided, even in what was going on in the Middle East. You know, he only wanted to talk about Gaza. He only ever wanted to talk about Gaza.
Yeah, but that's all ego, right? You know that is pure ego. You know, if he wanted to, he could have had a bit of self-discipline about him and had a bit of perspective, but he didn't, because he thought he was bigger than the BBC and they would keep tolerating it. So thank the Lord that finally they saw some sense. It's far too late, but yeah, it was purely his ego which was
Well,
leading
also,
to
I mean,
stupidity.
to take the story in a much more serious direction, you know, if you were to be uncharitable to Gary Lineker, you could say he was falling victim to, at the very least, pro-Hamas propaganda, whether willingly or not.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And again, you know, this is someone who I don't think has been to the Middle East recently. He's not an expert on these matters. You know, he's a footballer.
Yeah.
And I don't think, you know, he's someone who is particularly qualified to be talking about this. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve to have an opinion on it. He can speak about it for whatever he wants. When he's in kind of fancy Islington cocktail parties, go for it, mate. But when you have a huge salary for a government, you know, a huge government salary, you know, it is not your job to be speaking about the Middle East.
No, exactly right. So that'll be his final farewell at Match of the Day on Saturday. And I'm sure that Match of the Day will not suffer. Match of the Day will appoint somebody else who will be just as good and who will grow on the general public as a matter of course. And I'm glad he's not going to do the 2026 World Cup because, again, that would have simply encouraged him to think that he could just keep getting away with it.
Yep, agree entirely.
And I mean, I think maybe if he had any brains, he would do away with his Twitter account altogether. But, you know, not for me to silence the man, you know, after all. He's already blocked me, so I don't see his tweets that much anyway. I asked him some years ago whether or not he was paying the right amount of income tax on all the money he was making out of the Walker Crisps adverts while telling everyone that they should eat healthily.
Yeah, well, I think the one thing we know about the kind, compassionate left is they're not particularly interested in debate and discussion, so the block would have been the obvious solution to that uncomfortable question, Mike.
Yes, exactly right. Let's talk about Europe because that's going to be the big story today as well. Keir Starmer inviting, again, loads of European leaders into Britain for a UK summit. I mean, he had a summit with them all at the back end of last week in Albania, where it all went horribly wrong for him because he announced that basically on the same stage as the Albanian Prime Minister, we're going to be sending some people to a third country, Albania, starting soon. We're working on the deal. And even literally in the same breath, the Albanian Prime Minister said, no, we're not. We're not doing that. We do a deal with Italy. We're not doing it with the UK. We promise not to do it with anybody else. I mean, it was quite frankly, it was cringe-makingly bad. But he's going to have another go today, bringing in all these EU leaders. And, of course, the European Union only wants one thing from Britain, and that's to continue taking the mickey out of this country and continuing to rape it and rob it and completely rip it off. It's a Brexit betrayal, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, Mike. But here's the thing. We all know that this is what this Labor government wants to do, Brexit via the back door. That's not any sort of new or interesting news. But what the spin I want to put on this is, I think there are a lot of people on the right, there are a lot of Brexiteers that have lost faith in the Brexit project. I've spoken to countless people in recent months who are on the front lines of the Brexit campaign, and they say it almost in a slightly guilty, a guilty, embarrassed sort of way, but they go, oh, you know, have we made the wrong call here? And it is because they are conflating different things. They are equating the continued mass migration and the Boris wave with Brexit when that was merely a failure of public policy. They look at the continued economic stagnation in this country and they blame Brexit as opposed to the continuing high regulation and high taxes that we've suffered from since Blair came into office. We need on the right, and particularly on the Brexit arguing right, to remake the case because there are a lot of people on the Brexit side who have lost the faith. And it is going to be very easy for Starmer. It's going to be very easy for Labor to be able to do this backdoor Brexit or you know, re-entry nonsense if the Farages of this world, you know, if hopefully the Badenocks of this world and the Jenricks of this world can't actually remake the case for Brexit, because for better or worse, the case needs to be remade again.
Yeah, I think so. But what's interesting as well is, and you've seen, I've certainly seen it before. I don't know if you remember what it was like back in 2016, around that kind of time, Will. But basically, you know, you had most of the media wanting to remain in the European Union. Therefore, most of the media, you know, selling a particular narrative to the public. The one they're selling right now is not that we want to get back into the European Union, because they've given up on that. They tried that for a while, realised it wasn't really working. So rejoin has kind of, you know, gone the way of all flesh. But what they're now doing is making out that more and more people actually think that leaving was a bad idea. And that's the new mantra. So it's not so much that, you know, people are wanting to rejoin it, but they're feeling bad about leaving. So it's quite a subtle change, right? So they're trying to make out that if you carry on with closer ties to the EU, you'll upset fewer people. And those are arguments being made by what I regard as actually quite sensible columnists right now and quite sensible members of the media. They've fallen for it.
Well, Mike, here's the thing. I don't necessarily think they're wrong. I think that there are more and more people who do have regrets, but I don't think they should regret the decision to actually leave the European Union. They should regret that we had a very poor Conservative government that continued long-standing systemic problems in the country that were separate to Brexit.
Yeah.
You know, you can still have, you don't have to, you know, mass migration and the Boris wave was not a result of Brexit. I think it was made easier in some respects, but it was not a result of Brexit. The terrible parlous state of the economy is not a result of Brexit.
No.
But unfortunately, we have got, you know, we haven't had enough people on the right who have been strong enough to make a sensible argument. So the media that you're talking about, they're not necessarily wrong, but it doesn't mean that these sorts of closer, you know, subtle, stealth-aligned tactics to get back into some sort of, you know, European Union arrangement is the right thing to do.
No, I think they are wrong, because I think what they do is they take one nugget of what might be vaguely sort of, I suppose, attractive to them as an idea, and they extrapolate it and make out like it's the entire country. You know, if you live in London, for example, and you can find somebody that speaks English to talk to, and you can ask them whether or not actually they agreed that we left the European Union. Depends how old they are. Depends on, you know, what they're doing now. Depends on all sorts of things. You know, many people haven't even remembered the fact that we left. I mean, if you're in your mid-20s, you know, you're talking about, you know, 9 years ago this all happened, you know, so you probably weren't particularly aware of it at the time. And I think you've got to be careful not to make out that people, if you tell them they're not happy about something, they'll agree with you. And that's how... you know, these polls get done. But it's not necessarily about whether, you know, again, you've got to ask the right question. You know, do you want the European Union to be in charge of who gets to fish in our waters? The answer will be no. You know, do you want the European Union to be able to tell you exactly what you can send into the European Union, or else you'll be punished? Well, the answer would be no. Do you want the European Union to send loads and loads of, you know, uncharted students into this country to work, to study at universities where they charge the same amount as they do to British students? No. You know, all of those answers would be no, all of them.
You've got to ask the right question.
Exactly.
Is the exact right point. I always think about with this when the climate change conversation comes up, because inevitably when a survey comes out that says, do you think that there should be action on climate change, you always get a 70 to 90% response saying, yes, well, of course, we're good people, let's do it. But then if the question is, how much money are you willing to pay to actually have action on climate change, you get a very different response. So it is an interesting insight into the ways that the media manipulates basically how they ask questions in order to get the answer they want. I agree with you entirely. And so I think that is something which a discerning media consumer does need to be aware of. I think that's a fair point.
Yeah, exactly right. Good story in the Mail today on page 5, which I just want to bring to your attention. There's a lot of conversations at the moment about locking people up in prisons and letting people out of prisons. You know, we don't have any space, so, you know, we're going to have to let a few more sex offenders out, you know, a few domestic violence abusers out. You know, that'll be okay, don't worry about it. You know, but the scenes inside the jails are terrible. We've got a guy called Lord Timpson in this country who was given a cabinet post because he was made a lord, basically, and he's done some interesting things. He runs a company which employs a lot of, you know, former prisoners and gives them the rights. I mean, I've always had a slight question mark over it, because one of the things he does is he cuts keys, and I've always worried slightly about somebody coming out of prison who might have been in for burglary cutting your keys for you and keeping a spare set down the back of the drawers, you know. But this morning there's one story here, right? 7 years, for 7 years, this woman called Samantha O'Sullivan, who was a convicted fraudster, right? She was employed by the Prison Reform Trust as head of finance and human resources. She was given the job by Lord Timpson and a guy called David Gork, who's now doing the new sort of investigation into what prisons should actually do. They gave this woman 7 years of access to this particular charitable trust, and she stole 307,000 quid, right, which they didn't spot. And it just goes to show you that do-gooders are not always right.
Yeah, I think it does. It's a sad, like, it continues to be part of an extended story around the systemic failures in the prison system in the UK. And it goes to obviously how it is administered, and you can see here there's obviously serious failures of administration. But then there's the broader question of how we are sentencing people and what we are choosing to sentence and at what times. You know, we're still waiting on the Lucy Connolly appeal verdict, and it is a salient reminder that there are too many people in prisons who shouldn't be there, and there are too many people on the streets who should be in prison. So look, you almost have to laugh at the story you've just mentioned, but I think it is a small reminder that there is fundamental change that is needed across the whole of that sector.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Good to talk to you, Will. Thanks very much indeed. Political commentator there. Coming up after the break, Graham Stringer's going to be talking to us. He's a Labour MP who actually doesn't think that what Keir Starmer's doing is a great idea. But first, let's get a voice note from Sue.
Morning, Mike. Sue from Farncombe here. I love the Princess of Wales as well, but she should keep her nose out of businesses. Men having 6 months off, maybe a couple of weeks off to help the new mother. But honestly, what next?
Listen, I couldn't agree more with you, Sue. And look, I know that the vast majority of people love the Princess of Wales in this country, but I don't think this is a great look. You know, suggesting that people should have 6 months off just because they've had a baby, which is going to be a cost borne by the businesses of this country. I just don't think that's a very good idea. One here from someone who doesn't give a name. I don't regret leaving the European Union. It was an abusive relationship. This is what happens when people get scared about regaining their own autonomy. Starmer is a traitorous coward. And Ian says, how about instead of these hubs, the French just send the illegal migrants anywhere but to the UK? Why did we have to receive them and sort out the French and Europe's immigration problem? How about discussing that instead of them taking our fish and sending their unemployed youth, says Ian in Lancashire. Well, that's a good point. You know, let's have a conversation with the French about why they're not sending their migrants to somewhere like Serbia or somewhere like Albania or somewhere like Rwanda. How about that? Instead of sending them here, for heaven's sake. This is Talk.
And he turned it.
If your assets are more than £1 million, they want to then tax you 20% on that, which is half the usual rate. And we know what happened. Tractors in Westminster, actually farmers absolutely in floods of tears, particularly older farmers actually, because they just don't know how they're going to continue farming. Now, this is interesting because the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, or EFRA, released a report on Friday, and they said the changes were made without adequate consultation, impact assessment or affordability assessment. There's a surprise, isn't it?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:23. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course. We've got much to talk about this morning. It's a big EU summit going on this morning in Downing Street. And, of course, Keir Starmer is doing what he does best, which is to make out that he's an important figure on the world stage. The Sun and Harry Cole have got a big piece in the paper today. We'll be speaking to Harry later on about how happy Keir Starmer is to try and find a way to deflect some of the problems at home by making out that he's this senior statesman. Let's get a voice note from Sean, first of all.
Morning, Mike. Sean from Grimsby here. Keir Starmer's surrender deal does not surprise me one bit. He's a Europhile, mate. And what are Europeans good at? Surrendering and colluding, especially the French, Mike. Great show, mate.
Good to talk to you, Sean. Let's talk to Graham Stringer, Labour MP, of course, with his view on what is going on today. Graham, very good morning to you.
Morning.
Good to talk to you. A lot of people are asking the question this morning, you know, we don't really remember Keir Starmer talking about resetting his relationship with the EU or this country's relationship with the EU. It's not quite clear what it's going to end up as, but we all suspect, do we not, that this will not be necessarily to Britain's advantage.
That's my worry, certainly. We want better relationships with everybody we trade with. That's just common sense.
Yeah.
What we don't want is to be paying a very heavy price in cash for it. And if there are disputes about any relationship we come to, then we want to be at the judgment table. It appears, and we don't know, that the judge and jury, if there are any disputes, is going to be the European Court of Justice, of which we won't be represented. So that's damaging the sovereignty and our own control of ourselves. There are issues about fishing rights, why we should be giving fishing rights away. I don't see. So there are some pretty fundamental principles about sovereignty here, as well as practical things about finance. The Labour whips, I'm sure, later this year will be asking me to vote for some pretty unpleasant cuts in welfare.
Yeah.
If we're wasting money paying the EU for things that we shouldn't be paying the EU for, then that's going to be a very difficult discussion to have with the whips.
Quite. And isn't it the case that an awful lot of, shall we say, the enmity between the UK and the European Union since the referendum in 2016, and maybe even more since 2019, when we actually physically left, or we voted to leave and we left in 2020, a lot of that enmity has come from the EU itself, you know, like a lot of the kind of, you know, shall we say, spiteful decision-making that's been done, the punishment of people who had homes in Europe, you know, the fact that you can't take your pet there as much as you used to be able to, you know, the fact that they wouldn't let us use electronic gates if there were electronic gates to use. You know, I was saying earlier, that hasn't been a hindrance for me to go to Europe, because I just go in the line where there isn't anyone, because everyone else is in the EU line. And you go, as a Brit, you go through pretty quick, actually.
I agree with you. At the time of leaving and the horrible period between the referendum and actually leaving, when the Commons got itself into a mess, I used to have a whole series of quotes from commissioners and other leading EU figures that were all similar, saying that they were going to punish the United Kingdom for leaving the EU, partly because they didn't want anybody else to leave, because it's a bit of a ramshackle organisation at the moment where they don't agree. So you're absolutely right on that. They've been trying to punish us, and I don't think we should be paying cash or in terms of going away our control of our own laws, because they wanted to punish us for doing what we were entitled to do, which was to leave the European Union.
And again, you know, it feels as though we've had all these conversations. People are trying to make out that people, you know, there's a much different view now of the Brexit deal that was done, because it wasn't done very well by the Tories, and we can all agree that they didn't do a very good job of leaving properly. You know, we've still got a bit of limbo in Northern Ireland. Nobody's quite sure what goes on there, and there are things that are left sort of not particularly properly nailed down. But there's a view abroad at the moment that, you know, fewer people now are that worried about sort of finding closer ties with the EU, because they regret or they don't like the fact that we left. I'm not sure if that's true. Do you?
I'm not sure. I think people have been wearied by the length of what should have been a straightforward decision.
Yeah.
It was the largest democratic vote in our country's history. I think they're weary by that. But I think if the calculation by the Prime Minister and other ministers is that people don't care about these things anymore, I think they're wrong. People aren't stupid. You know, we've had years and years and years of debating it. People understand the issues. They wish we had better relations. That's just, as I said before, sensible. But they don't want us to pay a price for the decision that they took. One of the things that isn't said very often is most of the leading figures in the cabinet actually were pro a second referendum, which I think was an unacceptable position to take. They resigned from that, they moved back from it. But this feels, I don't know what it is because I've not seen the details of the deal, this feels like a slow backdoor way of re-engaging with that process of sliding us back into the EU bit by bit.
Yeah, well, there's no question, is there, that Keir Starmer certainly wanted a second referendum. He made no bones about it. But he's a man who I think even by most standards has been quite surprising in the way that he manages to change his mind on all manner of things, including his speech last Monday on immigration, his decision-making on the pensioners' winter fuel allowance, you know, many other points of policy that the Labour government have now completely and utterly changed their view on.
I think what you say is factually accurate. He has changed his mind on a number of issues. He stood on quite a left-wing platform when he stood to be leader of the Labour Party. He's moved considerably away from those positions, and you say, and in some changes he's made, I agree with him. I think we cannot go on allowing literally millions of people into the country net, and I think he was right to change the policy on immigration. So I think it's unfair to criticise politicians for always changing their mind. The world changes; you have to respond to that.
No, I don't criticise him for. I don't criticise him.
You're right; he has changed his mind.
Yeah. No, I don't criticise him for always changing his mind, but I do criticise him for changing his mind always, because he seems to change his mind on absolutely. It's a question of where you put the always, really, isn't it? I mean, how do you feel as a backbencher, Graham? I mean, you've always seemed to me to be a relatively sensible Labour MP. We've spoken to you many times over the years. I mean, I must confess, I didn't think I would particularly enjoy the Keir Starmer Labour government, because I thought a lot of things would happen that I didn't agree with, which is fair enough. But I didn't really expect them to be quite so incompetent as this.
I have been very disappointed with the decision on the winter fuel allowance, which wasn't flagged up. I was very disappointed that there was no limit put on the amount people would have to pay for social care. I suspect I'm going to be disappointed when the details of benefits come through. I can list a number of things. The Mauritius deal is not good. To start with, I thought they were just mistakes. I voted against my better judgment to reduce the winter fuel allowance because it was the start of a new government, and I thought they deserved some slack. But they continue to be making decisions that I find difficult to justify. And as I said before, if we're going to spend money getting things that are just common sense with the EU, then it is going to lead to very difficult conversations between a lot of Labour MPs and the whips.
Yeah, and does that put Keir Starmer in a difficult position? I mean, is there going to be moves from within? And I know it's not easy in the Labour Party to change leaders, but what sort of pressure is there building on that?
I very much doubt that Keir Starmer will be changed. I wanted a challenge to be made to Gordon Brown at the end of the last Labour government, and there appears to be no appetite ever within the Labour Party to change leaders. We're almost the exact opposite of the Conservatives, who change their leader at the drop of a hat. So I don't think that's going to happen. What I'm going to focus on is helping the government to make better decisions.
Yes, well, that would be nice for some of us anyway. Graham, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Graham Stringer, Labour MP there. With a slight note of, shall we say, caution about Keir Starmer and some of his views. I mean, you know, I don't criticise people for changing their views, but I do criticise Keir Starmer for changing his view on everything, all the time, constantly. Whatever wind blows in his direction, that's what he then decides to support. Morning, Mike. Great show, says Leah in Belfast. I voted to remain. However, if we had the vote again, I would vote to leave, just because of the way we've been treated by the European Union. Well, this is the point. You know, who on their right mind would want to go back into an organisation that punished us while we were in it, and then punished us even more when we left it? Great show as always, says Richard. I do not regret my vote to leave the EU whatsoever. I regret voting for Boris and the Remainer Conservatives, who made a complete hash of a deal. We should have left quickly with no deal and taken the hit. We would by now be well sorted. I totally agree with you. I remember having all those conversations in 2019 down in College Green when we had the tent of shame. Not all of you probably were listening in those days, but we were very, very much in a stalemate in politics where nothing was happening. Nobody could do anything because of the Remainer Parliament, which was trying to block at every single moment Theresa May's ability to do a deal with the European Union. And I mean, it was a very, very complicated and frustrating time for everybody. And if Keir Starmer's going to take us back into that, what the hell is he thinking? 7:34.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. I'm Mike Graham, 7:36. We'll be here, of course, until 10 o'clock. One here from Chris. He says, I totally agree with you regarding the 6 months off work after having a baby. Who's going to pay for it? Well, this is it. Can you imagine the amount of money that we go missing out of the economy at a time when we really can't do anything for that? Margaret in Yorkshire says, Mike, the footage you showed of Mr Starmer at the gathering of leaders showed him looking desperate to be included in the conversation, moving from one person to another. He looked unimportant. And Kev in Shropshire says, Mike, Brexit was a kick in the teeth for the elites, the establishment. They didn't like it. They're still fighting against it. Brexit makes perfect sense. We need to have politicians that represent us. Or what is the point of them? It's either MEPs or MPs. Why have both? Exactly right. Well, this is it. I mean, they've spent a very long time at the old Labour project trying to work out how to get back in with the European Union. And this is obviously the result of what it is that they've done. That they've said we can't pretend that we want to rejoin anymore, and we can't even pretend that we don't want to rejoin anymore. But what we will do is we will somehow imagine what would happen if we were still in the EU. What rights would we have that we don't have now? Let's try and get some of those back and then try and convince everybody that it's a great deal. That's what they're doing. It's smoke and mirrors. Let's get a voice note from Rob.
Morning, Mike. Rob from Dorset here. There's only one reason, Mike, why France don't send their refugees to another country. Because they've already got one to send them to. The UK is France's Rwanda. Great show as usual, mate.
It's a good point, yeah. They've already offshored their migrant problem to Britain. Marvellous, isn't it? Let's talk to Caroline Turner, UK Lawyers for Israel. There's a couple of stories to bring up with you, Caroline, but I can't start the conversation with you without mentioning Gary Lineker, really, given the news that we woke up to this morning. Yeah, I thought you might make you smile. Gary Lineker, finally, the BBC has seen sense, it would seem.
Yes, so it sounds like It sounds like Gary Lineker's finally come to his senses and resigned, I believe, after all the unfortunate comments that he's made. That's what. So I think that's a good result for everybody.
Yes, I think it is, and also a good result for him. Although apparently he says that he's now thinking about entering politics. So I mean, we may not have seen the last of him.
Well, I hope his followers don't vote him in. Really.
Yeah. Well, I think he's going to find that being a politician is a bit more difficult than being a football commentator and doing a football show every Saturday night and pontificating on Twitter. You know, it's not quite as straightforward as that, is it?
Well, I hope not.
No, exactly. Let's talk about a couple of other things that are going on. The unions in the schools of this country are telling teachers to bring the Palestinian struggle into schools. Their words, not mine. What do you make of that?
So it's particularly the National Education Union, the NEU, which is the biggest union, the biggest teaching union, and in fact, I think the biggest union in Europe.
Yeah.
Or the largest education union in Europe, with 500,000 members. Now, there is a big problem with this union in that they've got extremely close links with the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which, as its name suggests, supports Palestine, organises the weekly marches against Israel, and has extremely close links with the NEU in that I think 4 of its 14 directors are top executives in the NEU.
Right. And you make you make the right point there. It's not so much that they're pro-Palestine, but they are actually actively anti-Israel, aren't they?
Yes, well, they are, and they've adopted. The NEU has actually adopted the PSE's campaign points, which are to bring a mass campaign in support of of the rights of Palestinian people.
Yeah.
So that's basically what the NEU is trying to do, and it's trying to bring that into schools.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anyone would object to supporting or talking about the rights of Palestinian people in schools, but the trouble is that the sort of agenda of that organisation is to do away with Israel as an entity.
Exactly.
And that's the more important point. I mean, if they were just talking about, you know, human rights and the rights of people to exist and the rights of people to coexist, I think most people would go, all right, well, that's fair enough, but let's have a proper conversation about it, as opposed to, you know, all Palestinians good, all Israelis evil.
Yes, well, exactly. And the other part of their campaign is to campaign against all actions by Israel. So you can see where they're going.
Yeah.
Now, if they're bringing that sort of thing into schools, it is actually illegal.
Right.
Because there are acts of Parliament which say that there should be actually no political indoctrination in schools. And the sort of thing that the NEU is attempting to do is exactly that.
Yeah. Mind you, the NEU would like to bring all sorts of politicisation into schools, I'm sure. I mean, many of them already do it. You know, we've already got, you know, I've had children in the school system, and they come home and tell you what the teachers say. You know, don't buy the Daily Mail. You know, don't vote Tory. You know, that's a bad idea. You know, climate change is definitely a thing. We absolutely have to, you know, change the way we live. All of that stuff. You know, even on COVID. You know, they're very, very active, and I guess for them, the sort of the pro-Palestinian movement is just another part of it.
Yes, it is, and basically the the teachers have been, the NEU has been holding a workshop to teach teachers how to bring the Palestinian issues into schools. I mean, they've got one coming up in Liverpool in June, and I mean, the name of it is Understanding and Advocating for Palestine in Our Schools. Now, the point is, you can't just advocate for Palestine. The schools have got a duty to talk about Israel at the same time. So, I mean, the school, there's an Education Act which says that the school's got a duty to secure the balanced treatment of political issues.
Yes.
So anytime any political issue is brought up, the school has to present a balanced presentation of opposing views. So in the case of, talking about the Middle East, they also have to talk about the Israeli view.
Yeah.
It's actually such a tricky and sensitive issue that, and there are so many conflicting views, and there's so much misleading information around that. I mean, we think that it's actually something the schools should probably steer clear of, simply because you have to be an expert in the subject in order to deal with it, and the teachers aren't necessarily capable.
Well, we all know what the problem is here, don't we? I mean, the fact is that this is a union which does not tolerate anybody being pro-Israel. It's as simple as that. So therefore, you will not get any balance from any of their representatives at all.
No, that's right. That's exactly right, and that's the experience of any pro-Israel teacher that attended their union meeting.
Yes. Didn't somebody try and make a speech about Israel, and they were sort of booed off the stage, effectively?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
A teacher tried to speak against some anti-Israel motions and tried to explain unjustified use of the word genocide, for example, and tried to remind the teachers of what happened on the 7th of October, and was literally booed and hissed and asked to leave.
Yeah.
So that's the treatment that any pro-Israel teacher would get at the NEU conference.
Yeah,
and a lot of Jewish teachers have felt that they've had to leave the NEU because it just doesn't represent their views.
Right.
And that's so unfortunate that the NEU is actually being so racist in a way.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. It's more than unfortunate. It's dreadful. It's absolutely horrific.
Yeah.
Just to add insult to injury, I don't know if you've seen this story this morning. A Labour council is to be twinned with a Palestinian city run by Hamas. This is London Borough of Brent. Who students of politics will know is not exactly right-wing. It's the most left-wing borough in London, practically. Basically, they've decided to partner with Nablus in the West Bank. Tory councillor Michael Morris said he's very concerned as the city's governing council has 15 members who are part of Hamas. So, you'll see one of those nice plaques next time you're up near Brent Cross Shopping Centre, which will say, we're teamed with Nablus. Marvellous, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, and if they're going to try and do any, student swaps with with a town in Nablus, it's going to be quite difficult.
I think so. Caroline, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Caroline Turner there, UK Lawyers for Israel. Let's get a caller from Leeds. Steve wants to talk to us about migrants, I believe. Steve, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mark. How are you?
Good, sir. What can I do for you?
Just a quick one.
Yeah.
This deal about youth mobility in Europe.
Yeah.
If they sign it today, what's to stop the French giving all the migrants on the Calais coast nationality?
Yeah.
They'll all come over as French citizens.
Yeah.
And say, Keir Starmer will have stopped the boats. Because they're all coming on a ferry then as French people.
Yeah. Yeah, listen, there's absolutely nothing to stop them doing that. And by the way, it's already happened in Germany because an awful lot of asylum seekers in Germany have been given German citizenship on a sort of a speedy boarding basis, right? So they'll all be coming as well. The whole thing is kind of, illegal migrants by disguise.
Well, I remember when Sir Keir Starmer first got into power, went to Germany. If you remember, he met with the Chancellor and the Germans said, we're going to get tough on migration and start kicking them out. And what they meant was, they're going to kick him into France, and France is going to kick him into Britain.
Yes.
we're just going to be Europe's dumping ground, but Europe's Rwanda for all its illegal migrants. They're under 30, give them a passport, send them to UK.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Steve. I can't disagree with any of that. Thank you very much indeed. Steve in Leeds is worried that that's indeed what will happen. I wouldn't be at all surprised. You couldn't say that that's not going to happen, could you? Because that was the fear about the whole idea in the first place. And by the way, since when were youths up to the age of 35? 35? You're hardly a youth, are you? Just so many summits as he had or been to against other past parties, says Vinny. Well, we found out back end of last week he was off to Albania. I think he's going to Belgium soon. He went to... did he not go to Norway as well? And he's always jetting off somewhere, old Starmer, because he needs to get away from Britain. Because every time he opens the doors and the curtains in Downing Street, it looks awful because everything in Britain has been ruined by this government. It's as simple as that. This is Talk.
If your assets are more than £1 million, they want you then to actually 20% on that, which is half the usual rate. And we know what happened. Tractors in Westminster, actually farmers absolutely in floods of tears, particularly older farmers actually, because they just don't know how they're going to continue farming. Now, this is interesting because the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, or EFRA, released a report on Friday, and they said the changes were made without adequate consultation, impact assessment or affordability assessment. There's a surprise, isn't it?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:52. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. It is going to be a beautiful day today. It's going to get up to 19, 20 degrees. You know, we're in the midst of May the 19th, in fact. It's hard to believe how fast this year is marching on. It'll be June soon, and we'll be, God knows, talking about the summer months, talking about all sorts of things that happen in the summer holidays. Kids are currently doing their A-levels, doing their GCSEs. If you're a parent, you know how stressful that can be. The best thing to do is to switch on Talk, listen to the common sense that emanates from the speakers and just relax, OK? And just remember, no matter how much Keir Starmer tries to sell you down the river, he won't be able to succeed in absolutely everything that he does. The one piece of good news you might be waking up to this morning is that Gary Lineker is on the front page of The Sun, an exclusive. No more World Cup gigs for him. He's not going to be doing 2026 World Cup because, according to The Sun, he's quit the BBC. Over that tweet that he put out very unwisely a week or two ago. He realised that he'd overstepped the mark. He had a conversation. They've agreed to part company mutually, as they say. A lot of people think the BBC finally saw the light and decided enough was enough. John Mayer's here, former BBC producer. John, very good morning to you.
Hello, Mike. We meet again. Same subject, maybe for the last time.
Except finally, the BBC appears to have got themselves a bit of a backbone here. And he gave them a bit of a gift, didn't he? I mean, Paul Conyu's written this today. Though I've often defended Lineker's free speech in the past and condemned the Gaza situation, so Lineker's reposting of the infamous anti-Semitic rat image rendered his BBC role untenable, an indefensible own goal. I think he's right, isn't he?
Icarus has gone too close to the sun this time, hasn't he?
He has. He has,
and his wings have gone down. I mean, you know, he did cross a red line. He's been stretching the elastic for you know, a year or two, and the elastic has finally burst. So you know, I'm not surprised, but you know, he is brilliant. Did you see the cup final on Saturday?
I watched it on ITV.
Oh, did
John.
you?
Yeah.
Well, I watched it on the BBC. I mean, he's a superb presenter. He really is, and he won't be out of work for very long. He'll be working for America.
Well, I think he doesn't want to be a presenter anymore. I think he's going to go into politics, is what I'm hearing.
No, he says not. I mean, I think he'll work for an American network for the World Cup. Watch it happen for serious amounts of money. You know, so it's no skin off his nose.
Well, I think you might find that one of the reasons that he realised he'd overstepped the mark is that there are quite a lot of people in the world who don't share his particular view, and there will be many people in the United States of America who would regard some of what he posted as rather anti-Semitic. He might not be anti-Semitic, as friends of mine have said who work in the media, but he's reposted quite a lot of anti-Semitic things, and so you know, I wouldn't be too sure about what he might end up doing in America. He can probably get himself back into the Qatari TV business if he wants to do that.
He can work for Al Jazeera, is what you're saying, is it?
Well, he's already worked for Al Jazeera once, so why wouldn't he do it again?
Well, I mean, I think he had a bit of a death wish, because in the last 3 weeks he's done 2 TV interviews and 1 paper interview in which he's openly criticised the BBC and his boss. It's not a good idea to criticise your new boss and say, you know, he's not up to it. He's only a newspaper journalist. And I think he knows what he's doing. I mean, he's got a parachute. He's got goal hanger, which is making him a lot of money.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, but it's not about the money for people like him, is it, John? Because he's got plenty of money. He's got more money than he knows what to do with. It's not about the money. It's about the fact that he loves being in the public eye. People have said to me, and I'm sure you've witnessed this particular, you know, phenomenon. When you become as famous as he is, you quite like the limelight. You quite like being written about. You quite like being in the headlines. And sometimes you lose track of actually why you're in the headlines, whether it's good.
Did you read his former boss, Roger Mosey, in the Sunday papers yesterday?
I didn't.
He said you did. Oh well, he said he was head of sport, and he came back from a match through an airport with Lineker, and everybody was stopping him all the time and treating him as a friend and wanting selfies. You know, fame is a wonderful thing, but actually, underneath it all, I suspect he's probably quite a nice bloke. If you saw the 2 interviews he did with Amal Rajan and the Assembly, you know, he came across as nice, honest, straightforward. His trouble is that...
Yeah, but he's very arrogant is the problem, and it's his arrogance that has been his downfall, John, as is often the case with these characters, is that, you know, he may well be a nice guy, but he couldn't see the wood for the trees. He couldn't see that he was talking himself out of a very good career.
And nobody was there to filter him and to chop off his Twitter fingers.
Which is what the BBC should have done, because if the BBC had acted some time before this, he would still be there. They would never have had these conversations, and he'd be quite happily doing the World Cup in 2026. And who knows, he might even have stayed on as Match of the Day host. As you said, he's a great asset to the BBC. You said he's a great presenter, and now he's gone.
Well, you know, the BBC saving 1.3 million, but you know, nobody replaced them. I heard of a conversation with a senior BBC executive where she said to Lineker's manager, "How are we going to replace Gary? We don't know how we're going to do it." At which point he said, "Well, why are you doing it then?"
Well, that's the problem with the BBC, isn't it? They're supposed to have these executives there because they're supposed to have a plan. And they would have a plan if they were any good at their jobs. You know, their job is to find a new Gary Lineker. And if they haven't found one, then they should not be in that job.
They found 3 new Gary Linekers on Match of the Day. It seems not one of them has ever played football professionally. No. I mean, the BBC may not have a plan. Gary has a plan. You can be sure of that. Watch him re-emerge in some shape or form. Doing some form of presentation somewhere in the world for an awful lot of money because he's bloody good at it.
Do you think he was wrong to say what he said last time? That tweet that he removed?
I think he was stupid. I think, before retweeting something, he should have read it. And as I say, somebody should have chopped off his Twitter finger.
Do you really think he didn't see the rat? Do you really think he didn't see the rat?
I do, actually, because he apologised. I do think his
what? So he didn't see the rat, you're saying?
No, I don't think he did. I think he apologised so quickly that
he was so keen. Well, if he didn't see the rat, then he was just very, very keen to tweet something that was anti-Israel then.
He did. I don't know if you read the interviews with him, but he said, there needs to be an honest debate about Gaza.
Yeah, but that's not the issue. Gaza is not the issue. The issue is the BBC, and the BBC should have stopped him when I said they should have stopped him, and then we wouldn't be in this bad situation. The BBC looks stupid. It looks like they're going to be without a star that they say they love to keep because they can't find anybody else. They've made a massive blunder here, haven't they?
This is without another star, you mean? So this is another BBC.
Well, you're the one that
star.
said the BBC don't know how to replace him. That's what you said. Those were your words, not mine.
I know, but the BBC should have been tougher with him and with Hugh Edwards. So you mean you were proved right, Mike?
Yeah, thank you. That's all I needed to hear. Very kind of you. John Mayer, former BBC producer, finally admitting the truth, that I was right all along. Jim in Dorset says, Lineker, good riddance to bad rubbish. Enough said. And the one from Andy in Weymouth, you now realise that Lineker has left the BBC. He'll be even more vocal. Be careful what you wish for. Listen, I don't mind Gary Lineker being vocal. I just objected to him doing it while he was working for the BBC. We're all about free speech. If he wants to come in here and talk to me about it, I'll be more than happy to entertain him. Absolutely. Gary knows where we are. 0344 499 1000 is the number. Loads more coming up. The EU Brexit betrayal coming soon. We've just been talking in the office here about how many of us have been attacked at some point or other by some form of flying beast or any wildlife. I mean, so we'll take your stories this morning.
Hello, this story is concerning wildlife. It's concerning a rhino.
A rhino?
Right? Yeah, a rhino. I used to live in Kenya when I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Okay.
And we were in this wildlife park in a grey Morris Minor. This rhino started chasing us. There's me and my sister in the back seat.
Right.
It was like something out of Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
We were turning around saying, "Believe it, Dad. Just put your foot down, Dad. We're in a field." Put your foot down, this rhino was chasing us.
One from Mark here in Derby. Went on holiday for our first romantic holiday to Tunisia years ago. Decided to take my girl into a petting zoo. I got a bag of food to feed the animals. A giant goat then went for me, putting his front legs over my shoulders and proceeding to headbutt me over a fence into one of the pens, covering me in the food and making my nose bleed. I got out of the pen, then the goat and all his mates attacked me again, sending me running and screaming like a girl out of the zoo, with my girlfriend rolling with laughter on the floor.
A tarantula climbed up the bottom of the bed on the sheet.
Yeah.
And it walked all the way up. It's eyeball to eyeball.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, what am I going to do when it climbs over my face? But then a miracle happened. It raised its 2 front legs and waved them around. And then it turned around and walked down the side of the sheet.
Boris Johnson been attacked by an ostrich. The former PM was enjoying a safari trip with his family when the bird leaned into his car and went oi oi and pecked his hand. In footage shared online, he quickly jerked from the ostrich. Don't dirty minds away from the ostrich, and shouted, "Oh, Christ, get hell," before driving off. And so I just set it out there. Have you been attacked by an animal? When I was about 7, says Trevor Jenkins, on holiday in Spain in the 70s, a monkey pulled my long hair. It was long because it was the 70s. I was in floods of tears. And as a family car drove out the car park, an elephant ripped off the car mirror. We got the message. Spanish animals aren't to be trusted. Jeremy, Brittany here from the United States. I was spurred by a rooster in my right foot a few years ago. Spurred? How do you get spurred by a rooster?
One here from Dan in Hampshire. Morning, Mike. Is an Aussie that has been dive bombed by our version of the
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. Coming up to very nearly 3 minutes past 8. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. Harry Cole joins us in this hour. Political editor, of course, at The Sun. He's got a piece in the paper today. Great big front page headline on Gary Lineker quitting the BBC in the hate row that followed him retweeting an anti-Semitic tweet back in about, 10 days ago, in which there was a rat depicting a Jewish person, which I'm afraid was the end of Gary Lineker. It should have been the end of him many months before this, but he will not now present the World Cup in 2026, and he will do his last show as Match of the Day host for the BBC next weekend. Keir loves getting in bed with the world, says Harry Cole, but what about Britain, Prime Minister? And the Sun's lead page also asking the question, we will not forgive a Brexit betrayal, which is what Keir Starmer very much appears to be setting himself up for today. He's having yet another EU summit. You just can't get enough of them, can they? We were talking about earlier on, one of the big stories today that we want to get into is the fact that somebody wants to build a power station in space, believe it or not, and various people have said that sounds a bit like the Death Star to me. Might not be the greatest idea anybody ever had, but it's a company based in Didcot who say they can harness the power of the sun by putting a power station up into orbit. I mean, if it works, it works. It'd be great. But can you imagine what might go wrong? And then people were wondering, is Keir Starmer really Darth Vader? No, says Stephen Doncaster. He's not Darth Vader. He's more like Daft Failer. That's good. I quite like that. We can have some more of those. More Star Wars characters for Keir Starmer to think about. Loads and loads of you talking about what's happening with the EU and the European Union today. Fishing rights, of course, up for grabs. Is Keir Starmer going to give those away? Freedom of movement to anybody under the age of 35. The Labour Party seems to think they're youths. We've still got massive immigration problems. They're suggesting now that foreign offenders, if in the new world of Labour, because they now don't like immigration, will face immediate deportation. But things are going from bad to worse on the domestic front. 13,000 pupils left the private school sector since the VAT imposition of tax, and that has, of course, affected massively the state sector, which they said in the Labour government would only result in about 3,000 people moving. They got that wrong by a factor of more than 4 times. Also, Angela Rayner's under pressure on free speech, because apparently your free speech, if you're a lefty, is protected by the Equality Act, but if you're a right-winger, it's not protected. So Lord Toby Young is going to be asking questions about that. Also, let's talk as well about Elton John. He's basically threatening to sue the government over AI. He says that Peter Kyle, the tech minister, the business minister in this government, is in fact, in his words, a moron. Also, the Princess of Wales says men should get 6 months off when they have a baby. I think she's got that completely and utterly wrong. I'm Mike Graham. This, of course, is Morning Glory. Let's do it. Chris says, this morning, Mike, when my son was born, I was on duty as a fireman. I got a call from the wife saying the baby's on the way. Got permission to leave the station, took her to the hospital, watched the birth, then straight back to work and dealing with a fire all in 3 hours. So why would you have all this time off? Well, it's a good question. Warwick says from Devon, Mike, once again, a wonderful start to your brilliant show. Why, oh why, does Keith Starling keep using his catchphrase of, I get it, when breaking news? Quack, quack, he doesn't. What an absolute buffoon. We can't even send in the clowns, as they are already in government. I think that's the trouble, isn't it? May as well send MEPs again and close down Parliament. Starmer and his front bench never accepted the result of Brexit, and by ignoring a vote, this to me ends democracy, says Jane. Well, a lot of people are very concerned about what Keir Starmer's doing. Is he clutching at straws? Is he so desperate to get some form of good news out of anywhere that he's going to do yet another international summit where he thinks he's going to make Britain a bigger player on the world stage? I think that is a massive problem. Let's talk to Mark Littlewood, Director of Popular Conservatism UK, of course. Mark, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike. Great to be with you.
Good to see you. This has all got some very bad sort of antecedents to it, this whole conversation that we're having today. I mean, it seems to... I've already had a couple of conversations, one with Graham Stringer, Labour MP, who was actually pro-Brexit, saying, we've already had all of this backwards and forwards about fishing rights. We've already talked about freedom of movement. We've already had, trade conversations. Almost everything that Keir Starmer's trying to reset has already been decided. And the reason, if we are being treated badly by the European Union is because they're treating us badly. It's not our fault.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. I mean, from the outline that we know of this deal, and it's taking a bit of time before we get the details, unfortunately, Keir Starmer can't even surrender properly and quickly. But from what we know of the outlines, this is a step-by-step surrender of the freedoms that were eventually won back after the Brexit referendum and the interminable time it took Parliament and the government to leave.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a huge swathe of questions that come off the back of this. I mean, in effect, Keir Starmer, says this is all about initially defence and security cooperation. Well, you would think that the Europeans would be on bended knee to want that from us.
You would have thought so.
But instead of us getting concessions, all of this seems to be concessions the other way.
Yeah.
The only particular benefit, so-called benefit, I can think of is that British passport holders will be able to use e-gates for EU citizens when we travel abroad. I mean, I have to say, anecdote alert, I haven't travelled to every European airport, but travelling to Europe since Brexit hasn't been a problem at all. The queues have been
well, I've
pretty,
actually said
pretty short.
actually the reverse, because I mean I've been to plenty of airports, as I'm sure you have, that don't have e-gates, right? So the e-gate question is a bit of a shibboleth in terms of whether it makes any difference. One, but also two, what I've found since leaving the European Union is that actually we go through a quicker queue because all the EU citizens are in the EU queue and we're on our own because Europe, generally speaking, doesn't have that many. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have that many people flying in from America or Canada or Australia, but a lot of Brits fly into a lot of these European destinations, and we're the only ones in the queue.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly, that's been my experience as well, especially flying into Mallorca. You definitely want to have a British passport with you. You get through extraordinarily quickly.
Right.
But the real problem here is it looks like the British government are going to embrace what's known in the trade as dynamic alignment. That's to say that if EU rules and regulations change, ours basically will change in lockstep with that. Well, that's a huge surrender of sovereignty and will more or less bazooka attempts at doing other trade deals across the globe, because anyone else we sit down with, the Americans or the Indians, will sort of say, well, hang on 1 second, these are your regulations at the moment, but if Brussels says jump, you're going to ask how high, if any regulations change in the future. And, of course, there'll be a role for the European Court of Justice, ultimately in determining whether Britain's following these sort of rules and protocols.
Well,
so
I mean,
it doesn't unravel all of Brexit, but if you were looking at a government that might have an agenda step by step to wholly unravel Brexit, this is a pretty big first step, from what I can tell. And it was one of your listeners earlier, Mike, who said, Keir Starmer says he's listening. Well, I'm absolutely astonished to hear that, because I would have thought there are swathes of Labour voters who will be pretty horrified that the government seems to be undermining and unravelling a democratic decision made clearly by the British people, what was it, 9 years ago?
9 years ago, and for which they didn't really provide any sort of roadmap or framework before the election. They didn't mention that an EU reset was coming, and it's very clear to me that what's happened here is that Keir Starmer and his complete Remainer cabinet have worked out that they can't carry on banging the drum for rejoining the EU, so what they'll do is they'll kind of, hoodwink us all into thinking that, oh, it's called a reset, but it's in all but name, trying to pretty much sign up to all of the things that we severed our ties from.
Yeah. I mean, I think what it points to is it's difficult to work out what Starmerism really is, what the underlying philosophy and ideology of this government is. But definitely one element of it is a lack of faith that Britain can actually control its own affairs, and a strong preference therefore to hand over control of a good number of British affairs to foreign agencies, be that the EU or the International Criminal Court or whatever. So there's this huge lack of self-confidence, a belief that international cooperation with almost any sort of foreign agency that happens to be relatively close to us geographically is likely to be a good thing. Starmer's background obviously is in human rights law. We've had the whole farrago over handing back the Chagos Islands, which seems to be an act of incredible national self-harm, motivated exclusively by a desire to gold plate international diktats and rules and regulations. And we're seeing that broad philosophy, I think, play out right now. I mean, the interesting thing will be to what extent has the government costed any of this? I mean, we heard earlier from a Labour spokesman that, well, if there's an EU youth mobility scheme, it's more likely that more Brits will be going abroad than EU citizens will be coming here. OK, but supposing the opposite happens, what would we do then? What will we do if young EU citizens that come here don't disappear and go back home after the end of their tenure? Is it true that we won't now be able to charge EU citizens what we want to go to university, that they will get the British university fees? And that's just about the youth mobility scheme. So the overall outline of this is pretty goddamn grim, but the devil that's going to be in the detail is going to be grimmer. And I'd be very surprised if the government's got any compelling answers to the sort of questions I've just raised there, Mike.
And also, I might have a bit more sympathy with Starmer if he was saying, you know, all right, youth mobility, it's good to get, you know, young workers coming in to do a bit of work experience and or a couple of years abroad, whatever, you know, but why do you have to take it up to the age of 35? 35 seems pretty old for me for youth movement going on, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly. I would wholly agree with you. It's 18 to 35 is not really a sector of the economy. I mean, that's a colossal cohort. That's an entire generation, basically. So the key thing is going to be here and in other areas, what are we going to give away? Why are we revisiting the whole area around fishing and going to give up fishing rights again? It is true that fishing is not a particularly large part of the UK economy.
Well, not anymore.
To certain coastal towns, it's crucial. I think it's also some symbolic importance as well, that if a country can't really control its own waters or is surrendering that, then it's questionable whether it's truly a sovereign country. That seems to be on the table as well with yet another concession. So I can't see that there's anything that we're going to get out of this that looks like particularly unalloyed great news for Brits. It looks like we're going to be giving away a lot of concessions to the EU for nothing in return that is aligned with our clear national interests.
Well, according to the front page of the I newspaper, which I never generally rely on as a great source of actual fact, they claim that food's going to get cheaper and our trade is going to be boosted. Now, I don't understand how either of those things is going to be true. Can you explain that?
No, I don't agree with either of that. It requires this sort of mental leap, Mike, that if we align all of our regulations with the EU, that facilitates trade between the UK and the EU because we don't get into arguments about whether the correct standards apply to a given product. But frankly, we could do this unilaterally without Keir Starmer having to prance off to some summit by simply saying, for the time being, we will recognise any product, of any foodstuff that complies with single market laws as being acceptable to sell in British supermarkets. Even if you don't reciprocate, we'll let your stuff in. We trust your food standards. We don't need to align with them to do that. We just need to recognise it. We could do the same with the USA, for example. That gets highly controversial around things like chlorinated chicken, but in theory, we could say, we trust American standards on pharmaceuticals, on electrical goods, on food. So if you've got the American kite mark or the EU kite mark, you can sell your goods in a UK supermarket. You don't need to negotiate to do any of that. You could decide to do it unilaterally in Britain's own interests. So why he needs to actually be sitting down with Ursula von der Leyen and others to simply pull the levers that are in his own control, in his own hands in Whitehall, is rather beyond me.
Sure. But how does olive oil, for example, get cheaper if any of that happens?
Well, it would just be a question of whether there are, I don't know the specifics on olive oil, but if there are slightly different olive oil regulations about the sort of bottle it's got to be in and the packaging it's got to be in imposed by Europe that are slightly different to our specifications of what sort of bottle it's got to be in and what labels it's got to be on it, then that can cause a little bit of friction and confusion, and crates of olive oil could get held up or new labels need to be put on them. But it's pretty much a rounding error, I would suggest. The idea that people after this surrender summit are going to be walking through the supermarket once it comes into play with their jaw dropping at how much cheaper prices are is laughable. At the very best, it's at the margins, and even at the margins, it's not something you need a summit for. As I say, it's something we could simply choose to do ourselves through our own parliament.
Yeah, exactly right. So far, the negotiating purposes of this government seem to have been woeful. You know, we do a deal with the United States of America, which was better than it was, but still costing us more in tariffs than it was before Donald Trump came into power. So that's hardly a win. With India, we've managed to give away the country so that people from India can come and set up companies here, not pay any national insurance, and then hire loads of people from India who also won't pay any national insurance to come and work here, presumably undercutting British jobs. Both of those things are bad news for the British economy, while Keir Starmer hails both of them as good news. They can't be both, can they?
No, that's exactly right. And I think the problem here is if you were to ask Keir Starmer or any of his government ministers, what are the really big concessions and changes that you want to get out of the EU? How do you think the EU are treating us poorly or unfairly or unreasonably or not as generously as they might? What are the massive things that you would like to see the EU give to us? They go all a bit fingers and thumbs. Yeah. Their faces go rather blank. So it seems as if they're just motivated by this general concept that the more international cooperation we have, the better. And I'm afraid that means you get completely done over in any negotiation. Yeah. If you just walk into a negotiation with the EU saying, we'd like to be closer to you, we'd like to be more aligned with you, we'd like to work hand in glove with you, please tell us how to do it, well, you'll get a whole list of demands that you rather than meekly concede to. Yeah. It's not obvious, for example, what Keir Starmer might be doing to ensure that financial services in Britain can get easier access to the EU market. You could see that as the sort of thing that could really help the British economy, with financial services being such a big part of our economy. But he doesn't seem to have any list of demands himself. No. He wants to know what other people want, then meekly signs on the dotted line, shakes hands with them, and claims it's a triumph. Well, that's no way to negotiate at all. That's just a way to roll over, I'm afraid. So I can't see anything out of this that we're getting that the EU would think, wow, that was a big concession to Britain. That hurt a bit, but we've given them that one at least. Yeah. Not one. It's a bit like saying, on the list at all. It's a bit like saying, everything they're doing is what they perceive to be in their own interests, and Keir Starmer's following along with that, not actually defending Britain's national interest with any sort of grit or determination at all. Yeah, it's a bit like saying, look, we've got a shop, but it's not doing such good business as it used to, so we're going to invite more business, and what we're going to do is open the door in the morning, we can let all these people come in, and they can take anything they want out of the shop, not pay for it, and leave. But that will at least mean that we're doing better. That's what it seems like to me. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good analogy, that it's just seen that, you know, anything that can show that our relationship with the EU, and we're really talking about our relationship with the EU institutions here, that, you know, anything that can show that Keir Starmer is getting on better with Emmanuel Macron and Ursula von der Leyen and various others, anything that can show that is seen to be a triumph. So what we want is a great photo opportunity of people smiling and shaking hands and patting each other on the back. Whether it actually has a positive impact on British business, and I can't see anything here that's likely to, or has a negative impact on undermining British democracy, that's very much an afterthought. It's international cooperation for international cooperation's sake, by and large, and I'm afraid that means that the sovereignty that took us so long to win back, that hard-fought battle to win it back, well, we're now in quite substantial retreat, and I fear, Mike, this won't be the last of it. If this sails through Parliament and the Labour government think this is the way to go, expect more EU summits with more powers effectively disappearing away from Westminster and our democratically elected Parliament, and more of it going back to EU institutions. The entire thing that the British public told us nearly a decade ago they wanted to get away from. So a betrayal of democracy, no obvious benefits to the economy. It just makes the Prime Minister, in some people's eyes, not mine, not yours, but in some people's eyes, look like something approaching a statesman on the international stage. But that of itself is not enough. It's performative, it's not substantive, and it's not obviously in the interests of Britain, our democracy, or our economy. No, quite right. Couldn't agree with you more. Mark Littlewood, thank you very much indeed. Director of Popular Conservatism UK. We'll talk some more about this EU summit, because Harry Cole's coming up next. Policy editor of The Sun. He's got a big piece in the paper today about how often it is that Keir Starmer likes jumping into bed with the international set in order to make it look as if he's doing something good for the country. Let's get a voice note from Lisa.
Morning, Mike. It's Lisa from Canterbury. I don't know how Starmer's allowed to get away with this. Don't people have to vote in the House of Commons? I mean, this is probably the nail in the coffin. for him and the country, really. I mean, he's still letting all the boats in. He's letting the Indian people in without having to pay national insurance. Now the 18 to 30s. I mean, is it going to work both ways? Are we all going to have, you know, free movement again in Europe? I mean, all he's done now is given complete control to the European judges to allow even more immigration, illegal immigration. It's just a dumping ground. He's totally betrayed the British people in its entirety, and I just don't know how he's allowed to get away with it. Thank you.
It's a very good point. Thank you, Lisa. We'll put it to Harry Cole, police commissioner at the Sun. Coming up next.
We've probably had more immigration every single year than we had in the whole period from the Norman Conquest to the Second World War. Initially, people blink. But these are facts, and the population of the country is changing, and it's really started changing very, very rapidly, very recently. So in the mid-90s, I mean, white British, you almost have to apologise for using the term, but the government has that as a term in the census. And the white British share of the population was well over 90% in the mid-90s. It's changing dramatically, it's changing rapidly.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 26 minutes past 8. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course. What's this new Starmer & Co. speak? Immigrants are irregular. No, they're not. They're very regular and they're illegal, says Jane. Thank you, though. And one here from Kev. I think we've done Kev in Shropshire, actually. Here's one from, where are we? Teresa, who says this. Morning, Mike. Going by Starmer's excellent record in negotiating skills, i.e. Chagos, I hereby predict will inherit all those not-so-young men of Middle Eastern extraction coming here after Merkel opened the floodgates. Well, there is that possibility. And let's talk to Harry Cole, political editor at The Sun. He's got a piece in the paper today, his big column on a Monday. Keir loves getting in bed with the world. But what about Britain, Prime Minister? He's got a point, hasn't he? Harry, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike. How are we doing?
Yeah, very well indeed. Fascinating column today by you. All the world's a stage, but if you're Sir Keir Starmer, it's also a comfort blanket. He does love an international summit, doesn't he? I mean, he's never cowed by them. He goes to Albania, gets completely humiliated by the Albanian Prime Minister, who says, no, we're not taking any of your bleeding migrants. And now suddenly he's about to give away the store, isn't he?
Well, it sounds like a deal was done. Well, it sounds like the deal is done. To be fair, the deal was done last week, but they're sort of haggling over minor details like how much of our fishing waters to surrender.
Yeah.
By the sounds of things, they were talking late into the night. You know, the EU love a bit of drama with these things. A bit of you know, to the wire works for everyone. You know, striving for Britain and all that spin. But frankly, this deal was done as soon as Starmer put the flare up about a month ago when he said, you know what, maybe we will have free movement for the under 30s, maybe under 35s. We're not exactly sure of the details. Tens of thousands of Europeans coming back into Britain to live and work like the last 10 years never happened.
Yeah, I mean, the fear is that, you know, he's basically renegotiated rejoining the EU, hasn't he? You know, because he didn't mention much of this before the election. I reckon he's been working on it. They've accepted as Labour Party members and all Remainers that, you know, we can't rejoin, but let's just do it in all but name.
Well, there's two distinct things here. There's one, you know, we already have a trade deal with the EU, a no tariff, no quota deal on services, on goods, on across the board. It's the biggest trade deal the EU ever did. That annoyed, you know, the Remainers, that they would have loved a hard Brexit. They would have loved us to crash out so they could all just jump up and down and point and scream and say, ha ha ha, we were right. But they didn't get that, so they've been determined to unpick this deal ever since it was done. Look, the Labour manifesto quite clearly said no return to the customs union, the single market, or free movement. Now, you know, like lots of things in the Labour manifesto, if you squint a bit, step back, there's wriggle room in there. So under 35s, potentially, you know, under 30s, but you know, it could be up to 4 year these visas. We'll be able to come and study and work in the UK. It sounds like we're going to sign up to a host of EU laws regarding food goods coming into the UK, be it sausages, chickens, sandwiches, all that like. That means that we will have to follow those rules in perpetuity and follow them when they're changed. So we become law takers without any influence over those laws. Whatever they say, it's gonna have an impact on the scale of trade deals we'll be able to do with other countries, which was a key plank of Brexit, as was leaving the jurisdiction of the European courts. It sounds like they've got some sort of agreement for further cooperation on stopping migrants coming over the channel. Let's wait to see the devil in the detail. But where there is some good news, I think, is this idea that British defence firms, which you know are recognised around the globe as the best defence firms in the world, are going to have the privilege to sell into European markets more easily, which it sounds like it's coming at a big price. But anyway, at least the arms industry is getting something out of it.
Well, this is the thing. Shouldn't that be a point of strength for a British team of negotiators? They should not be going, oh, thanks very much indeed for letting our incredibly good defence firms into your market. I'll tell you what, you can have our fishing rights for the next 10 years.
Exactly.
Surely they should be doing the other way around.
Exactly. At a time when every European country is increasing defence spending, the Germans, the French, they're all rearming. We should be dangling that as a carrot rather than letting them beat us around the head with a stick for the pleasure.
Yeah, exactly right. And the leader in The Sun this morning, next to your column, no forgiving a Brexit.
Lively, isn't it?
Very lively, and I agree with every single word of it. You know, because the British public will not forgive a Brexit betrayal. And I've already had people calling in this morning saying, you know, all this business of freedom of movement, how do we know that we're not going to see another influx of migrants who are just going to come under a different guise? Because that's entirely possible, for example.
Well, so these visas, they're going to cost somewhere between £1,000 and £3,500. They're going to be time limited. There is going to be, it turns out, eventually they've now accepted there is going to be a cap. We don't know what that cap is, but it's still going to be a lot. If you look at the other visa schemes we have with countries around the world and then extrapolate it to the size of the EU population, we're looking at tens of thousands of people. The pool of people that could potentially come and qualify this is 80 million. And as we know with many visas...
80 million?
80 million people under 35 in the EU, yeah.
Right.
It goes up to 150 million if you had all the nine candidate countries that are trying to join in the next 10 years. Yeah. But we'll leave that bit aside. But if you look at how we've dealt with these visas in the past, they tend to be abused. So people come, they stay. They overstay. They overstay. They find a way of coming and then sort of trying to then change their visa status once they're here. So it does slightly alarm bells are ringing in the idea that the British government is able to say, oh look, it's going to be capped, there'll be strong controls over this, we'll keep a beady eye on it, because that beady eye of the British state, underestimated the amount of migrants that were here for the last 5 years. They had to upscale that up by 160 last year, where last time we had a sort of similar situation or a comparable situation was during the referendum, when the government said, oh, there are 3.5 million EU citizens in the UK that we're going to give settled status to, when it turned out that all the European citizens who are here who applied and qualified to stay, it was actually 6 million. So we're just not very good at counting people in and out of this country. So it does look to me like a large sort of vessel of, to coin a phrase, a large sort of access point for people to come to this country.
Well, that's it. I mean, the only thing they're worse at in negotiating is estimating, isn't it, and predicting. I mean, just over the last 2 days, we had the jobs disaster for the Starmer jobs plan, which was going to be hopefully responsible for starting up about 1 million jobs in this country. It turns out that a study's been done over the weekend, probably only going to be about 100,000 jobs. They said 3,000 kids would leave the private education sector when VAT was imposed. It turns out 13,000 kids have gone into the state sector. They just keep making mistakes when they say this is what's going to be either the cost or the benefit of anything.
Yeah, they keep saying, "Oh, we've got a skills shortage. We've got, we've got gaps in the labour market with all these jobs that we can't fill." And at the same time, when anyone dares, be it the Prime Minister, when anyone dares suggest some of those millions of people that are on sickness benefits that shouldn't be, who are on benefits who can work, when you suggest, well, why don't they fill the labour market first? Why don't we actually solve the unemployment problem in this country of the fact there are millions of people out of work being paid to stay at home with backache? Well, before we start throwing over the borders to fill employment gaps, why don't we sort our own employment issues out?
Yeah, absolutely right. And what about the deal that's been done with the United States of America? Because I thought when that deal was done, we knew there was a lot more to do with it, but there was a suggestion that, Trump does not want alignment with Europe to be a problem for America, does he?
Well, exactly. I mean, the Labour are being very disingenuous. You'll hear a lot of things today about, oh, we've got a trio of deals in 3 weeks. The India deal, look, was part of that. It was probably about as best we could have got if you ignore the tax issues that caused a lot of upset. But this idea that the American deal they've done with the White House a couple of weeks ago was an all-singing, all-dancing Brexit trade deal is gibberish. It is misleading spin. It is a very, very small targeted deal to have some tariff relief from the tariffs that Donald Trump put in 2 months ago. So the idea that this is the great Brexit win that we've been holding out for all these years held up as a good sort of thing we can do once we've left the EU, it's just not true, because it's so focused. It doesn't cover vast areas where a future trade deal could do. But if we're aligned to the EU, we have dynamic alignment, as they call it, sort of, again, giving something quite irritating a sort of nice name, we will be hampered in the trade deals that we can do. And number one of those is America, because they want access to our goods market.
Yeah.
They want to sell us food and goods. And if we are jacking up our sort of regulatory sort of framework back to a level of Brussels, which frames itself on being a massive regulatory framework, which is one of the things that Donald Trump
which is why we left
hates the most. Yeah,
right.
One of the things that Donald Trump hates the most about the EU is its pettifogging, ridiculous red tape. And we're going to go, you know what? Sign me up, Governor.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid the Great British Betrayal sell-off has begun. Breaking news, UK and the EU have agreed a 12-year deal giving fishing access for EU boats. That's even more than they thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be 10. It's now 12.
I know. Whether it increases the quotas is where the detail is. So is it just extending the amount of fish that they can extract now for another 12 years? That's one thing. Whether it increases the amount of fish that they can pluck out, remains to be seen. But yeah, I imagine we'll be talking a lot of pollock today.
Yeah, very good. Well done. Excellent job. Harry Cole, good to see you. Great column again today in The Sun, page 10 every Monday as well. Listeners of The Sun. Coming up after the break, Catherine Porter's here, independent energy analyst. She's got plenty to say about the crazy Ed Miliband scheme. I might ask her about the space power station as well, which could be interesting. Let's get a voice note from Sandra.
Hi, Mike. Sandra from Essex. I am sick to death of taxpayer money being spent on anyone and everyone apart from the people of this country that actually worked to produce the money. And I've come to the conclusion that Keir Starmer actually hates the UK and everyone in it, and that's why he spends so little time here. Thank you.
I think I'd have to conclude the very same thing. This from Margaret in Birmingham. Starmer's out of his depth, clutching at straws. How can this country have another 4 years of this useless government? He's the worst Prime Minister in history. And one from Carl who says, Mike, two-tier Keir's mask is slipping once more. Last week he announced all migrants need a degree in English. He's now about to announce free movement for students and young people. Smoke and mirrors. The trouble is he has total contempt for the average person in this country. Bring on the next election. Well, listen, there's going to be plenty of what you might call bad water and bad blood going on between now and the next election. We'll see exactly how long Keir Starmer can cling on to his power. I don't think it will be for much longer. It's 8:38.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's 20 minutes to 9. I don't know where the time is going. Mike, when we left the EU, we became the biggest customer to the EU countries, I think equal to America. The EU don't like us leaving and setting a bad example, so needed to punish us. If you go to a shop or a cafe and they treated you like that, you would go to another shop. Simple. We need to realise how much power we have, but the elite establishment don't like Brexit, so they need to undermine it, says Kevin Shropshire. Yeah, absolutely right. It is ridiculous what's going on. So the breaking news, as I say, is that we appear to have given away 12 more years of fishing rights to the Europeans in return for what exactly? We don't really know. Let's talk now, though, to Catherine Porter, independent energy analyst. Catherine, a very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good to see you. You've got a new paper coming out later on today, but there's been quite a lot of activity over the weekend of people, you know, sort of debunking yet more nonsense from Ed Miliband and debunking yet more nonsense from this government's energy policies.
Yeah, exactly. So my paper sets out the costs of reaching net zero and really explains how renewables are not cheap, despite all the rhetoric that we're having from Ed Miliband. I go into quite some detail about all the different elements of cost associated with net zero and how they end up on our electricity bills.
Yes. And how is it that they keep getting away with such misleading information? Because, you know, I did a day's just phone-in without meaning to. It just kind of happened about heat pumps last week. And I was quite surprised to see the number of people that actually did have heat pumps. But we didn't find one person who actually thought the heat pump was a good idea because it didn't heat the home very well and it didn't heat the water very well. well, and it was more expensive than they thought it was going to be. And, you know, all of the, you know, commensurate costs of putting it in and maintaining it, and then finding out that an awful lot of the time it doesn't work anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a study on heat pumps last year and found pretty similar things. Heat pumps provide low-grade heat. It is not what we're used to from our boilers.
Yeah.
And so if your house isn't very well insulated, you will struggle to keep warm with a heat pump. And they work a lot less well in cold weather. You get a lot of noise from pro-heat pump advocates saying that, oh, well, they work great in Scandinavia, so that proves they work well in cold weather, completely ignoring the fact that across Scandinavia, people have more than one mode of heating in their homes, and far more Scandinavians have a wood-burning stove than have a heat pump.
Right, yeah, because you need one there because it's a bit bleeding cold, to be honest. But, I mean, what is it that people keep mistaking for truth in this whole argument? You know, when Ed Miliband talks about the only reason that we pay so much for our electricity is because of fossil fuels, I mean, that's wrong. When we're told that, you know, renewables will be much more efficient and much cheaper, that's wrong. When we get told, you know, once you've installed, you know, solar panels and wind farms, you'll never need to replace them, that's also wrong. I mean, it's all just a crock of nonsense, isn't it? How do they keep getting away with it?
Well, I think the problem is that this sort of green picture is very naive, and it's a little bit of a fairy tale. People want to believe it. People want to think that we can power our economy with some wind turbines and solar panels. I mean, they completely ignore the rather unpleasant supply chains associated with these things as well.
Yeah, well, indeed.
But it's just simply unrealistic.
Yeah.
But, you know, a lot of people who don't know better just want to believe it. They want to believe this fantasy.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's just not true. And we're having huge amounts of cost imposed on us because not enough people are challenging these narratives.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, now the challenges are emerging, but for too long they weren't. And for too long, this whole green fantasy has been pushed by a combination of wishful thinking and vested interests.
Yes, and I mean, it does seem, does it not, as though people do want to sort of do good, because that was one of the things that came out of my conversations last week about people with heat pumps. I said, well, why did you get one? And they said, well, we thought we were doing the right thing, you know, because we've been sort of bombarded with this propaganda that if you don't have one, you're somehow a bad person, and if you've got an opportunity to get one, then you should. But as I said, to a man and woman, they were all regretting that they'd done it.
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me because they're just not very good at what they do. And Britain isn't a very good country in which to have them. The moment you really need your heating, they stop working efficiently because you have to heat the outdoor element before it'll work. So a huge amount of energy then gets diverted to that instead of going towards heating the inside of your house, which is obviously where you want it.
Yeah, right. Now, I know you probably weren't expecting me to ask you this question, but there's a fascinating story in the Times today, which is almost so mad it might actually work, but it's even madder than anything I've seen that Ed Miliband's come up with, and it's a solar power satellite, which basically would generate power from the sun, which could then be beamed back to Earth in electrical form. And according to this piece, there's a company called Space Solar, which has been in receipt of £10 million of a government grant to work on this. And the backbone of the giant structure would be a series of cubes built using structural trusses. And so basically you'd have this power station revolving around the Earth. Sounds mad. Is it?
Yeah, so NASA did a study into this last year, and they said, yeah, well, you know, in theory it might work, but in practice there's quite a lot of challenges that you'd have to overcome before you could do it.
Yes.
So this type of structure would have to go in a much higher orbit than our satellites normally do.
Right.
You'd have to find some way of getting all of the equipment up into space in the first place, which would require a lot of missions and obviously a lot of cost associated with it. Then you'd have to find some way of beaming the energy back down to Earth without interfering with other things. Basically they said there was not really any realistic prospect that by 2050, which was the time frame in question, that this would be in any way cheaper than any of the other alternatives. They felt it would be quite expensive, even if the challenges could be resolved.
Well, so we can expect Ed Miliband to adopt it as the new policy from the next week on, no doubt, then. Yeah, apparently...
Oh, well, absolutely, at the same time as dimming the sun and spending public money on solar panels.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, apparently it would have to be 4,000 metres tall and be built from 20 metre square cubes. So, I mean, it would be the sort of colossus. Also, I don't know how you'd stop it from crashing into other things up in space, I suppose. That would be a bit of a worry, wouldn't it?
Well, I think they'd hope to put it above all the other stuff that's man-made in space.
Yes.
But yes, I mean, you've got all the natural space phenomena that you'd have to hope didn't crash into it and damage it as well.
I mean, I guess the other thing we should mention is that it was very, very much sneaked out, wasn't it, on Friday morning? The GB Energy Bill was kind of very quietly passed through Parliament without anybody really noticing. I suddenly spotted it on my Twitter feed that Ed Miliband was going, "We've finally passed the GB Energy Bill," which gives basically GB Energy the right to now raise money from public funds and from taxpayers' sort of bank accounts, if you like, to give away. And I think they've just given 600 million to Scottish Power, or the parent company of Scottish Power, to work on some project or other. And it gives GB Energy the ability to sort of be, if you like, almost a lender of last resort to very, very large energy companies.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was quite bizarre because the whole time that they've been talking about GB Energy, it's all been about community projects.
Yeah.
And the implication was that it would all be quite small scale, that you'd be putting solar panels on schools and hospitals, and it was all going to be very sort of locally driven.
Yeah.
And so then to come out with this announcement that they're supporting one of the biggest energy companies in the country that presumably has the resources to fund its own energy schemes. I mean, this is the other thing that's quite surprising and curious about GB Energy is that they've consistently said that they'll only support projects that are likely to generate positive returns for taxpayers. But if a project is likely to generate positive returns, then why does it need government support?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Good to talk to you, Catherine. Thank you very much indeed. Good luck with the launch of the paper tonight. Catherine Porter, independent energy analyst there. Very sensible woman who's got a lot of good ideas on what we should be doing when it comes to energy, rather than what Ed Miliband thinks we will do with our money. Let's get a voice note from Sharon.
Morning, Mike. Sharon from Yorkshire. I think what Keir Starmer's doing now, his eyes has been opened and he's not going to be getting back into politics in England. I think he'll end up in the European Union, sat there doing deals against us when he's in there, against the British people, because he's not for Britain, not for UK, not for England, not for anything that's over here. He wants to be Europe. That's my opinion, Mike. Have a good day. Bye.
Sharon, thanks very much indeed. Yeah, I think a lot of people would totally agree with you, because whatever else you know that Keir Starmer cares about, he doesn't appear to care much about anything in this country at all. Sharon says, please, 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 someone get this idiot of a Prime Minister out and send him on a one-way ticket to Brussels. Absolutely right. Coming up, we're going to speak to the Special Envoy for the Israeli Foreign Ministry and Jerusalem's former Deputy Mayor. This is Talk.
I think when a lot of people hear the words youth mobility scheme. They think about 18-year-olds coming over and sort of doing a bar job or something. But if it means that 30-year-olds from across the EU are going to be able to come to the UK and work on day one, claim benefits on day one, use the NHS on day one, bring their dependents, then it's a really different thing. And the government has not been able to give us any details of what it's arguing for.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 8:52. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through till 10 o'clock. We're nearly at the 9 o'clock hour already, amazingly. More breaking news, by the way, this morning. The Ministry of Justice has just released this as a statement. A significant amount of personal data, their words, of people who applied online to the Legal Aid Agency since 2010, including criminal records, was accessed and downloaded in a cyber attack in April of this year. So I guess that means if you applied for legal aid since 2010, up to April of this year, you may have been in some way compromised in terms of your data. So that's good, isn't it? It's good to know that the government's departments are so secure that absolutely any information they may have about you can be held absolutely in perpetuity without you having any fear whatsoever that it will be compromised by some group of banditos or terrorists. Fantastic. Well done to the Ministry of Justice, who literally wouldn't know how to run a bath. Let's talk to Fleur Hassan Nahum, Special Envoy for the Israeli Foreign Minister, a former Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, of course, as well. Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel are supposedly in talks with Hamas to end the war. Fleur, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
Good to see you. There's obviously been a lot of activity over the weekend. Israel going into Gaza, trying to clear out Hamas once and for all. It's a slightly new policy, I suppose. What's going on, as far as you can tell us, with negotiations, if there are any?
Well, the thing is that if Israel is saying to Hamas, if you don't return the hostages and you don't start dismantling yourselves, we're going to go in. At some point, we're going to go in.
Yeah.
And this is what's happening. All of a sudden, once we've gone in, now they want to talk, because this is what you do. This is, unfortunately, the only language these jihadi terrorists understand. We didn't want any of this. You know that.
Yeah.
On October 7th, we had just signed a ceasefire a few months earlier with Hamas. In fact, Hamas have started 5 wars since we left there in 2005. And so again, we find ourselves, we want our 20 live hostages home. We want another 40 that were murdered and bodies were taken over there. We want them home so their families can give them a dignified funeral. And they don't care about their own civilians. We've set up humanitarian zones. We are now organizing for humanitarian aid, not through Hamas, because Hamas is stealing the aid, and that's how they keep paying their terrorist soldiers. And so now with the Americans, we've set up a different type of mechanism to get the food to the people so that Hamas doesn't steal the food from the people. And of course, we want our hostages home, and we want the terrorist infrastructure removed.
Yeah.
I think any normal country would want the same thing.
Exactly right. But they managed to turn it into a propaganda victory, though,
Always.
sometimes, don't they? And that's what we
Everything.
saw. I mean, everything from Gary Lineker today to the Eurovision Song Contest that we saw on Saturday night, to the BBC, to a guy, unbelievably, who decides to attack or try to attack or disrupt the Israeli singer's act. You know, a young woman who was involved in this October 7th attack, who actually had to hide under dead bodies to maintain her own life. And some bozo from Youth Demand or something wants to throw paint over her. I mean, it beggars belief, doesn't it, the way people react?
It's ridiculous. It's double standards. It's demonizing the only democracy in the Middle East, which happens to be the only Jewish country in the world. So you can think, well, that means it's double standards, as I said, and it's ridiculous because we didn't want this war. We didn't start this war. And if Hamas just put down their arms and returned our hostages, it would be over tomorrow. The problem is Hamas use their people, not just as human shields. They use them as a weapon of war. They weaponize their own children and use our own humanity against us. This war could have been over a long time ago if we didn't have the standards that we have, moving people around, warning people. And in fact, even a month ago, Hamas came out and said that 75% of the people killed in this war were men of combatant age. So what does that tell you? That everything else has been jihadi propaganda, bought lock, stock and barrel by the Europeans. I just before your show, I was on a Spanish show, Mike. And what the Spanish did for Eurovision beggars belief. Instead of letting this girl, they put essentially propaganda about Israel and all the different lies and libels. That's what they did on Spanish national television. And what's the result of that? That the public in Spain gave Israel 12 points and the Spanish song ended up second to last. So there you go.
Isn't it interesting that the public's actual view is very different from those very, very loud voices of the pro-Palestinian lobby in every single place you go in the world? Strangely enough, apart from in Palestine. But even there are people actually demonstrating against Hamas, but unfortunately when they do that, they get slaughtered.
And nobody reports it. Nobody reports it at all. Al Jazeera, you do. Apart from talkTV, there's not many people reporting it. They've killed people, tens of people of their own people who want freedom, who want a peace-loving territory. They're not interested in that. Hamas have got bigger ambitions. They want to destroy it. It says it in their charter. They want to kill all the Jews. And when people keep telling you they want to kill you, we should believe them.
Yeah, I think you should, absolutely. Well, we wish you the best. Fleur Hassan Nahum, thank you very much indeed. Good to talk to you, Special Envoy for the Israeli Foreign Ministry and former Deputy Mayor, of course, of Jerusalem as well. Coming up in the next hour, Richard Tice is going to join us. Isabel Oakeshott is going to join us. We're going to talk some more about Gary Lineker. We're going to talk some more about what is being given away just currently as we speak by Keir Starmer as he does his European summit in Downing Street. He's already given away 12 years of fishing rights. And we've only just got to 9 o'clock in the morning. Absolutely extraordinary. Steve says this, Chagos giveaway, India trade deal, no action on illegal migration, apart from giving France hundreds of millions of pounds. And now the EU sellout. Starmer is betraying Britain and a greater threat to us than any foreign power. Kelvin says this, I don't regret leaving the EU at all. The only regret are the idiots we have in charge of our once great country. Very true. And on the subject of Elton John, who called Peter Kyle, a minister in this government, a moron, let's not forget, says Maggie, Elton John was going around encouraging people to vote Labour. So what changed, Elton? Well, he said it yesterday. We'll play the clip again. He feels very let down by Keir Starmer and the Labour government. They haven't done what they said they would do, and they're endangering the future of young people in this country. It's that simple. 0344 499 1000 is the number. This, of course, is Morning Glory. We'll be back with more after the news. Pie, which is much bigger. We've been talking this morning about a new theme park which is going to be built. The Universal Studios apparently are going to build it in Bedfordshire. We've been asking many of you to give us some ideas for theme parks. Alison in South Wales says in the new theme park at 5 p.m. every day they could have the PIP parade. All the people driving their brand new Motability cars.
Instead of the water rapids, you can have a road you go down that's full of potholes in a car with bad suspension and flat tyres. I don't know why they're bothering building a theme park in this country. They're going right, no one will be able to afford to go to it anyway.
How about the Rachel Reeves ride, says Terry in Birmingham. You go round and round and vanish up your own deficit. It's the HS2 ride. It travels at high speed for 10 feet, where everyone gets off and into the replacement bus ride. Tickets are £50 if bought 5 months in advance, or £1,000 on the day.
There's a strong rumour going round that Rachel Reeves is going to have a kissing booth for this theme park. So what I do, mate, I shove a £5 in a pot and you can go and fill your boots.
Thank you very much indeed, and very generous of you. One from G, who says fast-track entry to every ride for illegals, plus a free night stay in the Parks Hotel and free food. New theme park bumper cars will have to pay a congestion charge, and the funhouse isn't built yet, despite Angela Rayner's pledge to build houses. What about Ghost Train doesn't move because the driver's on strike? Have a good day. This is brilliant for the theme park. How about grow your own cannabis farm? Yeah, that's a good one. An Ethiopian safari park narrated by Angela Rayner. Says Gary in Durham. How about that? This sums up the Labour Party to me. The one idea they have to improve growth for the economy is to basically have a bloody big fun fair. It's the type of idea primary school children would pitch, given 10 minutes to come up with something. Well, it turns out, Matt in Royston, that it's not even their idea. but they're now trying to claim it's their idea, even though it was actually the Tories.
They have done brilliantly on breakfast, but you know on Drive you've done brilliantly as well. Downhill slide rides surrounded by ULEZ cameras so that people are fined on exit. Love it. You could have a Birmingham-themed Whack the Rat stall. If you whack the rat, you can have your bin emptied for free. On the Labour theme park, a house of mirrors where they're all boarded up because they can't bear to look themselves in the eye.
I've got a great one for you, mate.
This is for the is this for the Universal theme park run by Labour?
Moat right around the park.
Yeah.
With loads of dinghies. Call it the channel and say anyone who can break in, all is free.
Imagine the Scouts to say you can break into a theme park for free.
Hi, Jeremy. Hey, it's simple. You've got the Labour ghost.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 9. The day is upon us, ladies and gentlemen. If you've got people studying and doing their A-level exams, their GCSEs, you'll know what a little bit of pressure is all about. There's a little bit of pressure going on in this country at the centre of Downing Street right now, because there is, of course, an EU summit going on. Keir Starmer has only got to 9 o'clock and he's already given away 12 years of fishing rights to the EU, apparently for the particular pleasure of gaining some kind of access to the defence market in the European Union. Well, why on earth does he think he has to give some kind of incentive to the Europeans to get their hands on our brilliant defence manufacturing business? Because, quite frankly, we should be ones in the driving seat here, not the ones giving the store away to all and sundry, whether it be Emmanuel Macron, whether it be Ursula von der Leyen. You know, this should not be happening. We have basically said, have we not, that we wanted to leave the European Union in 2016. We're going to talk to Richard Tice coming up in this hour. Isabel Oakeshott's going to be here as well. Also, Theo Usherwood, talk reporter live from the EU summit. Let's get a voice note from Andy.
Morning, Mike. With your reference there to seeing how long Keir Starmer can actually cling on, I think cling on is probably a very appropriate description for him. Certainly, he doesn't warrant being in the Darth Vader territory, because that bloke was cool as a cucumber, Darth Vader, and Keir Starmer certainly isn't. So, yeah, cling on, definitely. Cheers, Mike.
Yeah, you certainly
Andy
is.
in Portsmouth.
He's clinging on, Andy in Portsmouth. Thank you very much indeed, to being Prime Minister. He's happy to jump into bed with anyone, as long as they're from the European Union, or certainly from Europe. What is going on with that? Absolutely incredible. And is Mrs. Starmer on the horizon today? We don't know whether she's going to be showing up at the old the EU summit with that bit of a scowl that she quite often gives to him. We've been asking you as well for other likely names for Keir Starmer from Star Wars, because he's clearly not Darth Vader. He's not evil enough. He's not clever enough. I've got one here from Craig who says, how about Jabba the Dud? Yeah, that's not bad. Not bad at all. We'll take some more of those. 0344 499 1000. There's all sorts of things going on. Elton John has called Peter Kyle, who's Minister of the Crown, a complete and utter moron. Angela Rayner's under pressure to give free speech to everybody in this country, not just to lefties. And according to the Migrant of the Day measurement, we've got a couple of stories for you. An Albanian mafia boss is still here, despite the fact that he's ruled to be deported about 3 times. He's still appealing, and he's still not going anywhere. Absolutely incredibly unbelievable stuff. And here's one for Richard Tice. Apparently, people who vote Reform are more likely to get matches on dating apps. Who knew that? It's 5 minutes past 9. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. Alison from Kent says, great show as ever. Here's hoping the info about legal aid will be leaked to expose how many illegal immigrants are claiming it over and over again to try to stay here. Well, that's a very good point. We just had a breaking news story there about how it is that apparently there's been some big data leak. So if you ever applied for legal aid between, I think it was 2010 and April of this year, you may well have all of your information compromised. Fortunately, I haven't applied for legal aid during that period, so I don't know about you. I imagine Richard Tice hasn't either. Richard, very good morning to you.
A very good morning, and no, I haven't applied for legal aid, and of course I'm not surprised that Reform supporters get more matches on dating apps. We're better looking, we're more fun, we've got personality, and we're full of common sense. So
yes,
that's completely logical, but it's a bad day, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Mr. Graham, because the white flag has been waved outside Downing Street. The great EU surrender by the UK is taking place as we speak. And at every level, it sounds like a disaster.
Yeah.
My constituents of Boston and Skegness, my fishermen in Boston, will be absolutely spitting mad on the news that it appears that Starmer, in the face of a request from the EU to extend the deal for 4 years, he said, no, that's fine. Have 12. Why not? Take 12.
Well, I mean, even
what's 8 years amongst friends?
Yeah. Even this morning, in the coverage of the sort of the late night deal going into the night, the worst case scenario was 10 years. He suddenly seems to have added another 2. These negotiators that this government have got appear to be the worst negotiators in the history of negotiating.
Well, the truth is that, of course, these are the people that they wanted to remain in the EU. They wanted another referendum. Starmer, of course, wants more freedom of movement, and that's the other big sort of surrender that may or may not be announced today, or it'll be announced a few days down the track, because it may be too difficult to announce that today. But this new word, youth mobility scheme, sounds jolly nice until you realise it's probably aged up to 30 or 35. And it's essentially freedom of movement through the back door, because let's remember the vast majority of EU citizens, East Europeans that came to the UK were, guess what, under the age of 35.
Yeah.
So, Reform just won by a landslide the local elections a couple of weeks ago, actually, which was all about stopping mass immigration, stopping illegal immigration. And Starmer's just basically flicking the V sign up and saying, we don't care, we're putting our fingers in our ears, and we're just carrying on. I think the British people will be very angry indeed. And then the other big thing, of course, that appears to be given up is, instead of persuading the EU as the merits of what they call mutual recognition of standards and rules, because both of us have high standards on things like food and goods, it looks like we're caving in and we're accepting EU rules on everything. So we become a rule taker, we give up even more sovereignty. Oh, and that means, guess what? Yes, we become subject to the European Court of Justice, which is one of the reasons for Brexit, was to leave that bureaucracy and that madness and that court.
But that's the trouble, they say a week is a long time in politics. This time last week, we were discussing Keir Starmer's volte-face on immigration. Suddenly he came from nowhere to declare that immigration was too high in this country and that he needs to reduce it significantly. Let's look at a week on, he's about to open the floodgates to, I believe, I was given a figure this morning by Harry Cole from the Sun's political editor's department, basically saying there's 80 million people that could apply for that to move here. And I know that, people would accuse me of being Suella Braverman-like by saying that, but that's a lot of people who can come here to do what exactly?
It'll be hundreds of thousands of extra people coming here, supposedly for up to 2 years.
Yeah.
But first of all, who's going to be checking their age? Secondly, who's going to be checking that after a couple of years, they actually leave? And the answer to that will be no one, and this will just add more pressure to suppress British wages, more pressure on British housing, more pressure on our health system. The simple fact is, this is a surrender of our sovereignty to bungling bureaucrats in Brussels. And it'll be good for reform, but I'm sad because it'll be a disaster for the country. And that's why when we win the next general election, we'll just rip this up, just like we're going to rip up the Chagos deal that this government's determined to do. These are bad treaties that are against our national interest, against our sovereign interest, and reform will stand up for it, just not going to take it.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is that people voted deliberately to leave this European Union because of the kinds of ridiculous red tape arrangements that we're about to now volunteer to be part of again. And all of this, the best thing that people can come up with is the E-gate argument. I keep saying, well, there's plenty of airports in the European Union that I've been to that don't even have E-gates. And what I've actually found, and many others have agreed with me, is that if you go to the EU queue, it's a lot longer than the non-EU queue because there's hardly anybody in that. It's just a few British people. So it's actually a lot quicker to go in as part of a Brexit Britain than it would be under this new scheme.
We're just being misled in so many ways. It turns out that actually individual EU nations, they do voluntarily have their own individual choice to let UK citizens use their e-gates. Countries like Portugal, very sensibly, adopt that. And we, of course, as is our way, we've played cricket and we've played by the rules. And so taking the moral high ground, we allow EU citizens to use our e-gates in the hope that that spirit of generosity and friendship would be reciprocated by our friends in Brussels. But oh no, just two fingers up to us, and we've just had enough of it, really have.
Yeah.
And there's another thing that we're being sort of conned about, saying, oh, it'll give us access to lots of EU defence contracts. Well, first of all, they're charging us a huge sum of money to do that. And secondly, that's for the birds. I mean, we've hardly got any EU defence contracts when we remember the European Union. So the idea that we're suddenly going to be given a whole load when we're out is for the birds. We should be focusing on things like the AUKUS submarine deal and more great international deals like that. That's really where the best international defence deals are done, and doing more with the US and focusing all of our security around NATO, not anything that is a slippery slope towards the sort of EU defence mechanism.
Well, exactly right. And I mean, Donald Trump has kind of made the point, has he not, that Europe hasn't spent much on defence over the years and they've been too reliant on NATO. And suddenly this kind of coalition of the willing, which means Keir Starmer gets to make an organised sort of summit once a month, and he gets to hang out with his mate Macron and his mate Zelensky. You're kind of going, well, it doesn't mean anything really. Without NATO, it's not worth a fag end, is it?
I don't think it is, because NATO is what provides us with our security, and we need to spend more wiser in ensuring that NATO is properly orchestrated, properly funded, and that we all pay our dues to it. And too many nations haven't, and this sort of distraction saying we've got to do more within the EU, it'll just end up in more bureaucracies, more tiers of waste and mismanagement, and it's that sort of stuff that I think people have had enough of. We want to, you know, we've fought so hard to get our sovereignty back by voting for Brexit and forcing the Tories to actually get it done, although they did it very badly. And of course, Northern Ireland is still semi-handcuffed to the EU, and we should be pulling further away and saying to the EU, guess what, folks? You're in recession. It's not working out very well. Maybe we should all deregulate, get rid of net zero, cut our energy bills, stop mass immigration, and then we might grow again. Then we might put more money into the pockets of your citizens.
Yeah. I mean, there was a fantastic tweet that I put out, I retweeted last night by Lucy Harris, who actually said the truth about this Labour government is that they're frightened. They're so frightened now because things have gone so wrong that they want to align themselves with the European Union in order so that they can say, actually, it's not our fault, it's theirs. You know, they're really telling us how to do it. They're really giving us the framework of laws in which we have to operate. And suddenly they're back into the bosom of where they want to be.
Yeah, well, frankly, I don't think it's a very attractive bosom. I think it's a bosom of failure, and we need to be lean. We need to be smart. We need to stop wasting money, and we've got to be held accountable. We're not afraid of that. We've just won control of 10 councils, and already just literally hearing stories of great savings in salary costs, scrapping £20 million investments that are unnecessary. I'm already hearing of. Yeah, so already I think we will show that we can save money, and that's what we need to do across this country. Yeah. And by the way, that's what the EU should do if it wants to grow faster.
Yeah, absolutely right. Good to talk to you. Richard Tice, thank you very much indeed. I've got this from George in Luton. Dear Mike, I think that our EU negotiators would actually pay full price for a DFS sofa. Absolutely right. And here from somebody without a name, don't worry about the free movement. No young European in their right mind would want to come here now. They know and they can see that it is a sinking ship. William in Hawley, great show as always, Mike. Can these fishing rights be overturned if the Labour Party don't get back in? I joined Reform 2 years ago. Well, absolutely right. You just heard it there from Richard Tice. They will, in fact, reverse these, whatever conditions and concessions turn out to be after the course of today. And this one from someone, again, who doesn't give a name. I've been asking for names, by the way, for Keir Starmer, for what he would be as a Star Wars character. How about Princess Leia? For our esteemed Prime Minister, says this, considering he thinks 1 in 1,000 women have the male appendage. Yeah, very good. Let's talk to Isabel Oakeshott, Talk's international editor. She'll, I'm sure, have a few things to say about this EU surrender. The Surrender Summit is what it's being called. Isabel, very good morning to you. But before we do that, I thought perhaps a word on Gary Lineker. the shock news that broke late last night that finally the BBC appear to have seen sense and given him the heave-ho.
Well, I think we'll all be very relieved not to have these cyclical conversations about Gary Lineker and just how amazing he is from one side and what the rest of us say, which is why on earth has he been allowed to get away with all this for so long. I think it's a relief that he's finally thrown in the towel and accepted that his political views, which he just cannot seem to resist articulating, are not compatible with being the BBC's. I think he's the highest paid recipient of taxpayers' money at the BBC, isn't he? Yeah. So this is long overdue, and I'm very glad to see the back of him.
Yes, I think we all are. A huge sigh of relief from around all corners of the country, I think. We were talking earlier this morning about Nick Thomas-Symonds and this whole youth mobility situation. I don't know if you saw it. I'm not going to play it, but we can if you want. Trevor Phillips had him on yesterday, and he played him a clip from Yvette Cooper, who only recently said, you know, this is not something we want to do. We don't want this free movement of people coming in, because you can't reduce immigration by continually holding a door open and letting more people come in, can you?
I think there is going to be political hell to pay for this deal that's being done today, this very, very dirty deal. Starmer has long been desperate to reverse Brexit, and now he's in a position where he's doing it in stages. This is a big set of concessions that he's making today. And actually, far be it from me to praise the Tories, but I think James cleverly had it right when he tweeted this morning that Starmer has got diplomacy the wrong way round. Yeah. You know, what you do is that you try to develop good relationships with other countries to further your own interests. You don't sacrifice your interests in order to develop better relationships with other countries. And, you know, Starmer, what bit of this doesn't he understand? The British public are absolutely fed up of the state of immigration. They are fed up with mass uncontrolled immigration. Starmer can shout as much as he wants about smashing the vile people smuggling gangs. He's smashed precisely 0 gangs. Legal immigration is at its highest level ever, practically. I mean, we know that it's being tinkered around the edges, but it's not likely to come down any. And now here he is, potentially opening the door to millions more coming in. And I'm afraid I don't believe any assurances that might come out that this will be, you know, they'll only be allowed to come for 2 years or 3 years, and it's under 35s or whatever. I mean, what confidence are we to have in our border authorities forever knowing who's left? Because we don't routinely check who's coming and going. And I'm afraid this is just going to usher in a whole other wave of legal immigration, precisely what Starmer 2 weeks ago stood up and very unconvincingly told us he was going to tackle.
Incredible, isn't it? And I mean, you know, we've been talking this morning to various people who said to me, you know, what guarantees also do we have that many of these young people, the youth that are going to be coming under the age of 35, are not, shall we say, recent European citizens who have come to Europe, you know, in the last few years and have been sort of given asylum in those countries? What's to stop them? There's no rule which says that they can't come. And so we're sort of back in the same boat where people who might otherwise come illegally will just end up coming legally.
I mean, I think Starmer is signing his party's political death warrant at this point. You know, he may get a high out of this for the next couple of years, or as long as he survives in Downing Street, which I don't think will be till the next election. He may get off on being one of the gang again in Brussels and being part of what he says Britain's back on the European stage and all of that. But the price that the country will pay is very high, and the political price that his party will pay, I think, is incalculable at this point. He's just played right into the hands of reform and even of the Tories, who are just going to now, from now on until polling day, say that you Keir Starmer, have sold out Brexit. You've reversed what everybody voted for. We knew you wanted to do it, you plotted it, and now you've done it. And I had hope that on the back of these trade deals that he signed, out heads of terms with the American trade deal and the Indian trade deal, that would have set us on a bit more of a path of divergence, not the opposite. And none of it's just been worth anything.
No. And you and I talked about this many times, didn't we, over the course of the last year, probably, even before we knew for sure that the Labour government were going to get in July. And I think we both thought that, they'll probably try something on. They'll probably try and kind of, sneak back in some way, shape or form. This seems to me to be a full, turning turtle scenario where the negotiators don't appear to be holding anything over the EU at all. They're just literally, saying, come on in, take what you like, we won't stop you.
Well, precisely. I mean, there's no sneaking around going on here. It's full frontal, isn't it? It's like robbing your house by coming through the front door. Just smash the door down and come on in and shout that you're there and then take all your stuff. There's no subtlety about this at all. And one of the things I think will astonish people is that Starmer didn't even try, by all accounts, to strike a deal which would enable us to send illegal migrants back to France, those that have come across the channel. Now, you would have thought that might at least have been on the table. I would have, if I were advising Keir Starmer, a Prime Minister who's very much on the back foot politically in the UK, I would have said, Prime Minister, even if you don't really want this aspect of the deal, really good idea to be seen fighting for it. Even if you lose that fight, to have the ability as part of this wider negotiation, not that I think we should be doing it anyway, to say, actually, we, the UK, want the right to be able to send migrants, illegal migrants, back to France. Didn't even try for it. The trade negotiators, insiders have said it was never even put forward. The politics of that, the stupidity of not even trying to fight for that.
Yes, absolutely incredible. I mean, I don't even know where it's going to end, but it will no doubt be something we're talking about for at least the next few days, for sure. Isabel Oakeshott, thank you very much indeed. Talks International editor there. After the break, Theo Usherwood's going to be reporting into us live from that EU summit. We'll find out precisely what is going on. John says this: I wouldn't believe a word that Nick Thomas Simmons says. On the 16th of August last year, he said it would be unfair to suggest pay deals would lead to more strikes. How wrong could he be? And Brian says, Mike, Starmer's Star Wars name, instead of Wookiee, what about Wokey? Well, you could certainly try that. Lee from Bristol says, morning, Mike. Sure, it would be better for us to fish and then sell to the EU. Well, it would be, wouldn't it? I mean, we'll be talking to some fishermen, I'm sure, this week, because they will be absolutely hopping mad on the seaside towns of this country, as Richard Tice said, in Skegness, down in Hastings, in other parts of the country where fishing was a massive way of life, but has now been denuded to such an extent because of the EU that you can't do it very much anymore. They are still making money out of it, but this is a total surrender. 12 years of fishing rights to the European Union. Absolutely unbelievable. Let's get a voice note from Pete.
Listen, you know what? All these decisions that are being took by Barney Starmer, should they not be going through the House of Commons and that, like, to be discussed and voted on? Because it's going to affect everyone, isn't it? And they're just like, gung-ho, mate. They're just making decisions that aren't good for the country at all. Anyway, mate, great show. Take care, mate. Bye.
Pete, thanks very much indeed. Very absolutely true. Of course they should be going through the House of Commons. How is it possible that they're not going through the House of Commons? It's absolutely incredible. How about this from Robert? He says, the e-gate argument is entirely spurious. I'm a Brit with a UK passport and I use e-gates in Spain all the time, as do my Spanish friends arriving here in the UK. Starmer has just given Reform even more MPs at the next election. His stupidity knows no bounds. And so say all of us. 9:25.
During the Cold War, in the 1980s, we had something called the Home Service Force. And there were groups of them around the country, and their job was to defend key installations, communication centres, power nodes, radar stations, things like that. But it looks as if they're talking about reviving some version of that. So the old thing about there's nothing new under the sun, we actually had this, you know, in the Cold War 40 years ago, and it worked quite well.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 29 minutes past 9. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through, of course, until 10 o'clock, half an hour more, and then Julie Hartley-Brewer will be here. This from Hev, who says Starmer is just working at what he wants, sod the country and everyone else. He is a sneaky, backstabbing traitor to the British. Keith Starmer should be called Darth Utrendus, master of gradual betrayal and shadow deals, says Tanya in London. It is absolutely right. Can the public vote for no confidence in this idiotic government, or does it have to be passed by Parliament, says Peter? Well, it's a very good question. Let's go straight down to the EU summit right now. Theo Usherwood is there for Talk. Theo, very good morning to you.
A very good morning to you, Mike. Great to be with you.
Yeah, good to see you. I've just seen a tweet from Harry Cole, who says to me today that only one side of these negotiations is leaking the details of them. I can only assume from that that it's not the government.
Yes, that fishing deal, 12 years, the Europeans very pleased with that. Reciprocal rights, so you can get French boats, Spanish boats fishing in our waters. And in return, Keir Starmer hoping to get that agreement on food and agricultural so that we can export goods to the European Union without those checks. I've actually just been downstairs here. Upstairs is where all the politicians are going to meet and hold a press conference at lunchtime. But I've been downstairs to where the catering staff are getting everything ready. And in one of the rooms, one of the stock rooms, they've got 4 crates of champagne stacked to bring upstairs. And I'm told reliably that it's the good stuff, it's the posh stuff. So clearly Keir Starmer thinks that there's something to celebrate, but I suspect many of your listeners won't.
Well, it's very true. Nigel Farage has tweeted in the last minute, if it's true, this will be the end of the fishing industry in this country, which is a pretty bold statement, and he's probably right.
Yes, from Brixham down in Devon all the way to Scotland, you know, fishing was always a central plank of that negotiation when we left the European Union, to ensure that those communities had sole right to fish British territorial waters. We've seen those communities, of course, blighted with the scallop wars and so forth. This is about, you know, Keir Starmer has decided that this is actually, you know, in a list of priorities that these communities are right down there, that what he wants to do is to ensure we've got access to that 150 billion euro defence fund. Just to put it in comparison, though, it's worth mentioning, Mike, that Donald Trump went to Saudi Arabia last week, and he signed a deal equally comparable just for the United States to sell its armaments to Saudi Arabia for the same amount without giving anything away, just to put that into perspective. And then, of course, the youth mobility scheme. In Spain, they've got youth unemployment. I checked the latest figures. Youth unemployment at 27.3%, to be exact. And the fear is, of course, that we're going to see a large number of young people from the likes of countries like Spain. Spain in particular have been pushing for this youth mobility deal coming to this country, whilst we have 1 million people, young people here in Britain, who aren't in education, aren't in training, and aren't in work. And the fear is, you know, listening to Richard Tice, their Deputy Leader of Reform, that that's going to suppress wages and make it even more difficult to get those young people in this country off benefits and into work.
Well, that's exactly right. And also, it was only a week ago that we were discussing Keir Starmer's new immigration policy, which was definitely to reduce immigration significantly. You know, I don't understand how, on the one hand, you can say you want to reduce it significantly, while now suddenly announcing you're going to invite certainly hundreds of thousands, as Richard Tice said, possibly more, young people into the country.
Keir Starmer's trying to face both ways. On the one hand, he wants to, of course, try and ensure that those voters who voted reform in the local elections, of course, taking Labour's 16th safest seat up in Runcorn and Helsby, come back to his party. But of course, net migration, 728,000 last year, more than 900,000 the year before, is at a record high. And the fear is, of course, that when we get the figures out in a couple of weeks, they may come down. But they're only going to shoot back up again as a result of this deal. And we're looking at something I've been told of around, very similar to what happens with Australia and New Zealand, 3 to 4 years potentially. But that detail, I suspect, we're not going to necessarily get today. We may get it today, but we're not necessarily going to get it today. And as Isabel was saying earlier, it's going to cause one hell of a row when it comes out, because the fear that if you add that sort of time limit in, it would mean that there's no way around Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, and Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, trying to exclude those young people coming from Europe into this country from the overall immigration figures. It's impossible to do.
And we just had a call from Liverpool just there before asking about why should this not have been done in Parliament. You know, will Keir Starmer have to take this to Parliament and have it unveiled as part of a new rules of alignment or something, or can he just get away with doing it, you know, in his own way?
No, doesn't have to take it to Parliament. We saw the Liberal Democrats pressing for the US trade deal to come to Parliament. We've heard calls for the India trade deal to come to Parliament. Within the procedures, they're arcane. They go back hundreds of years. Doesn't have to do it. He can just rubber stamp it. His government could just see it through, and it will just pass into law. And even if it did come to Parliament, Keir Starmer has a majority, of course, largely thanks to reform, because they split the Conservative vote at the last election. That meant even if it did come to Parliament, it would just be a talking shop, because his majority is so significant that it would pass into law. Of course, the argument is going to be from reform, from Nigel Farage, and Richard Tice was already making it, that if this comes in, you know, particularly around the agriculture, youth mobility scheme and fishing rights, that as soon as Nigel Farage becomes Prime Minister, he's just going to simply overturn it and we'll go back to what we had immediately post our exit from the European Union, actually when the deal was struck in January of 2020.
And just to go back to the fishing situation, I mean, presumably this will put more fish into the hands of European, you know, fishing companies, so that they'll be selling more fish to us. We spoke last week to a woman whose daughter runs a fish shop down on the south coast, who said basically the price of fish, as it were, I know we say, what's that got to do with the price of fish? The price of fish is rising already by 50% in the last month alone. And so if the French or whoever the other Spanish fishermen are selling us more of it, you know, I can't understand how Keir Starmer can make an argument that will say prices are going to come down.
We're going to end up in a situation where those communities, those fishing communities, are just going to go to the wall, because what's going to happen is they're going to go out. They're already fishing quotas in place, so they're going to have to share those fishing quotas with their European counterparts. So you can only fish, you know, for so many hours a day and catch so many fish. The French will come in and take their part. The Spanish will come in and take their bit. Maybe we'll see boats from, you know, southern Scandinavian countries come to UK territorial waters, and there'll be very little for those communities, you know, right up and down the coasts of Britain, in deprived communities as it is, to be able to access, to be able to fish for what they were able to do after we left the European Union, and then sell those fish up and down the country. It's just going to be impossible to do, and that's going to, of course, have a huge knock-on impact, because businesses are going to find themselves unable to cope, and they're just going to go. They're going to go bust, and that's, you know, those so-called deprived communities that Keir Starmer, those working people that Keir Starmer said he was going to stand up for, Mike, are going to find their lives made even tougher and even harder.
Yeah, and so when do we expect to see Keir Starmer, the negotiator-in-chief, putting a brave face on this publicly then for a press conference?
12:30. So he's going to be in just behind me at Lancaster House with Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, and Antonio Costas, who is, of course, President of the European Council, a three-way press conference here. And then they're travelling over to HMS Sutherland in London, which is on the Thames, and they're going to have a slap-up lunch there to celebrate their deal Mike, and then we should find out during the course of the day exactly what's been agreed, but we may not, as I said, get the exact precise details, the most controversial elements of this, particularly around the immigration side of things with that youth mobility scheme, until later, and that could be a few days away. And as I said, that's going to be the row that's going to run and run and run.
Good to talk to you. Theo Usherwood reporting live to us from the European Summit in London, where basically Keir Starmer is giving away the store, as we would say. Let's get a voice note from Brian.
Hello, Mike. It's Brian from Leon C. Just a quick question. Starmer, with all his antics, at what point can this man be labelled a traitor to this country? Great show as always.
It's a good question. Not so much for Good Morning from Sean in Norfolk. What Starmer has done in the last few weeks should be called treason, and he should be charged for it. I find his actions go against my human rights as a UK citizen. And Mike from Cleveland's on the subject of Star Wars and the theme. How about Obi-Wan Kenobi? That's quite good. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. 9:41, very nearly. Mike in Lincoln says, I'm wondering if an incoming government has any mechanism to arrest and put on trial an outgoing government for enacting policies that originate in ideology and are actually against the national interest. Think Chagos, the EU reset, etc. Most folk in Britain will see Starmer and Labour as traitors now. Well, there is that, isn't there? I mean, I'm always reluctant to talk about lawfare or anything like that to try and get rid of political parties. But listen, there's a lot of people unhappy about this deal. Let's get a voice note from Patrick.
Hi Mike, Patrick in East Yorkshire. This is an absolute disgrace, this fishing. Giving us all our fishing rights for 12 years. They come right into the coast as it is. And they're weaving in and out like a dog at Crufts through the poles of the wind turbines. Where is his mandate for this? Where is his... Who tells him, yeah, go ahead and go and do this? We haven't told him to go and do it. The voters haven't gone and told him to go and do it. He doesn't even come to Parliament. And you listen to the BS, he'll come out, this is a great deal for Britain. Well, it's not a great deal for the fishermen, I'll tell you that.
Exactly right. Good one, Patrick. Thank you very much indeed. How about this? Regarding the solar cube reflection, says Joe, idea, shouldn't it be easier to dig up our 1,000 years worth of coal underneath our feet? Wouldn't it? Yeah, good point, Joe. Of course it would. Speaking of which, let us talk to Simon Calder, because new ideas are always welcome here at Talk. And was it Friday, Simon? I think it was, where Thursday maybe, you flew off from Global Airlines main hub in Scotland, Glasgow Airport, over to New York. I was suggesting to you at the time that that your flight might not be quite as great as you were expecting it to be. Let's just have a quick look at what we said back then.
I wish them well, but I don't think they will be around in 40 years' time as magic. Oh, and here he is.
No.
Oh, here he is. This is James Ask with Mike. Here is he is the chief executive and founder.
Did you get a cupcake?
I didn't get a cupcake, James, but thank you.
Do you want a cupcake, Simon?
No, it's fine. I just want to know what happens next after this. I'm just talking to Mike Graham on Talk, and we want to know, you're flying from here to New York, you're flying from Manchester to New York. What happens after that?
Who knows? What happens tomorrow? Who knows? We'll see.
I mean, nothing personal. If I were you, I wouldn't get on that plane. He doesn't sound like the sort of guy that should be running an airline. You know, we'll see what happens tomorrow. I mean, you know, what the hell's he talking about?
Oh, no, it'll all be fine. It will, Mike. Look, aviation has never been safer. High fly, very good operation. The plane was very well looked after by China Southern, and it meets all the
Listen, you've got an hour to go, right, until you get on it.
Yeah.
Why don't you go and buy yourself a parachute? I presume you didn't go and buy yourself a parachute, but here you are, so I guess you made it over there fine and dandy. How was the flight, Simon?
Oh, it was absolutely great, Mike. As you can imagine, if you were on a flight which had a full complement of very good crew, all from, as far as I could see, Portugal and a few Spanish crew, employed by High Fly, and the idea is very simply that all the economy passengers we were put on the upper deck of the beautiful Airbus A380, so there were quite a lot of empty seats downstairs. Even upstairs there were empty seats, so you could stretch out if you wanted to across 4 seats. We got champagne offered within about 40 minutes of takeoff. Then we got lunch. In order to research it properly, I had one of each of the 3 main courses. I would recommend the sea bass.
Very nice.
Then about 3 hours later, we got dinner. I'm not a drinker on daytime flights, but if you were, you could choose from 5 different kinds of wine. And it was all very good. I mean, a couple of things you perhaps would miss. No actual in-flight entertainment on your seat back screens. You had to have your own device and hook up to the on-board Wi-Fi, but there wasn't any Wi-Fi connecting you to Talk and the rest of the planet. But apart from that, I arrived on time. The worst thing was actually getting here to Kennedy Airport and then going through US Customs and Border Protection, where they are taking literally the first thing that we got from Donald Trump on his first day, which is vetting and screening aliens. Yes. That's me and you. To the maximum possible extent. So it took me a couple of hours to get through there. But I'm flying back to Glasgow in a couple of hours.
What I've found, depending on which time of the day you fly in and which actual terminal you fly into, can make a big difference at Kennedy as well. So which one do they go into?
Terminal 4, the main international arrivals terminal, which is basically they pick up it's the one that Virgin Atlantic uses. So, quality airline there. But so does every other airline in the sun, under the sun.
That's
and
what I mean.
They
you don't
just
want to land after a plane from China's just got there either.
Well, it was just an awful lot of people standing. I mean, 2,000 people. And the funny thing is, I couldn't talk to you like I am now because none of the Wi-Fi works. No mobile phone signals works because you've got 2,000 people in a very small area, all trying to get online and on the phone at the same time. So you're completely incommunicado as well. You can't even say to your friends, I'll be out in an hour, because you can't get through. No. But there we are.
Well, it's a big problem. It is a big problem, not just for Global, but for everyone. If you can't tell, like the cab that's waiting for you, that you're coming out, it can get a bit tricky. But I'm told that they've got another one of these flights going out of Manchester, I think next week. And then what after that?
It's actually on Wednesday, and there's still seats available if you want to buy some. Okay. After that, well, exactly, and that was why it was so important. You got, thanks to you, we got the only kind of substantial interview with James Asquith, the founder. But he just said, we'll see. And frankly, I'm very happy to see an old plane which was just gradually getting old in the desert being brought back into use. I'm glad to see more competition. I'm particularly glad to see very good quality service for a economy fare. But it remains to be seen how that turns into a sustainable business model. So we shall see on that. But meanwhile, Global Airlines might be coming to an airport near you, and if it is, then it's worth trying out.
Okay.
I hope it will be all right. And by the way, we're all going to be racing through the borders in 2 seconds flat in the EU apparently soon. Personally, I don't think that's going to happen. It's enshrined, Mike, in EU law that EU citizens have to have a fast track. And if we suddenly turn up as well, getting in their way, and we voted to leave, 9 years ago, they'll say, hang on. What are that lot doing? Yeah, get that Mike Graham out of my way.
Well, listen, I've repeatedly said on the show this morning, Simon, that actually I find not going in the EU line is a lot quicker because there tends to be hardly anybody in it apart from a few Brits. So, I'm quite happy not to go through the Leadenhall gates. Thanks very much indeed. I'll just carry on as if I'm some kind of alien because I get through much quicker.
Well, some people would say you're some kind of alien, but I personally wouldn't be among them. You're very welcome in countries across the world, Mike.
It's true. I've never been thrown out of any country, Simon. I can proudly boast that. Thank you very much indeed. Good to see you and safe home. We'll see you when you get back. The only people celebrating Starmer's surrender of the UK sovereignty to the unelected bureaucrats will be those that disrespect democracy. Any party that agrees to completely overturn this betrayal, says Jenny. Morning, Mike. Regarding the solar crew, we've got that one. Mike, I can see the future, says Gary. In 2050, an alien life form far more technologically advanced than our own travels at 20 billion light years to visit us in the UK and find out more about life on our planet. We point up at the sky with pride at our solar space station that's beaming energy to Earth, and they say, why don't you just burn oil and coal like we do? Yeah, well, you may well ask. Coming up, it's 9:49. I'm sure we've got plenty of calls to take. We'll be telling you more about this EU summit, precisely what is going on. But what on earth has happened to this government? Not only have they made a complete dog's breakfast of every single domestic thing that they've touched, they're now giving away the store. They're now giving away British sovereignty, even sovereignty, even as we speak. It's hard to believe they're getting away with it. Somebody needs to stop them. It's 10 to 10.
if your assets are more than £1 million, they want to then tax you 20% on that, which is half the usual rate. And we know what happened. Tractors in Westminster, actually farmers absolutely in floods of tears, particularly older farmers actually, because they just don't know how they're going to continue farming. Now, this is interesting because the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, or EFRA, released a report on Friday, and they said the changes were made without adequate consultation, impact assessment or affordability assessment. There's a surprise, isn't it?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 9:53. Kemi Badenoch has just tweeted, 12 years access to British waters is 3 times longer than the government wanted. We're becoming a rule taker from Brussels once again, and with no details on any cap or time limits on youth mobility, fears of free movement returning will only increase. This is very concerning. That's from the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch. Let's have a listen to something about free speech by a man by the name of Gary Lineker.
And some people would say, Gary, just while you're working for the Beeb, just don't bang on about what you don't like with government policy. Just put a sock in it.
And the people that say that obviously are the people that do try and champion freedom of speech. But freedom of speech when it suits them.
Do you see this as a freedom of speech issue?
Of course it is. Why shouldn't I have an opinion on things? I'm a bloody footballer who's turned into a sports presenter.
Front page of The Sun today tells the story as to why. It basically says that Gary Lineker's quit the BBC in hate row. So there is limit to freedom of speech. You see, you can make as many arguments as you like about it, but if you get it wrong, then it's not about the right to say things. It's about what happens when you do say them. And when you do retweet anti-Semitic tweets, then I'm afraid that's going to come back and haunt you. So as a result, Lineker has ruined his brilliant career as a presenter. You may or may not like the guy, but he had a great career, and now it's going to be tarnished forever because he's not going to be doing the World Cup, and he is finally going to leave the BBC next weekend, which was not his plan. Let's talk to Andrew, who's in Halifax. Andrew, very good morning.
Morning, Mike.
How are you doing, sir?
Not so bad. It just seems that this betrayal is a betrayal of such epic proportions that if the PM had been alive in biblical times, Judas Iscariot would be wearing a Keir Starmer wristwatch.
He would. He absolutely would. It's extraordinary with the ease with which Starmer is doing this, isn't it?
Yeah. This was always the plan of the British state. The blob never wanted Brexit. And the reason why Brexit has been a disappointment, even though I'm a passionate Brexiteer, is because people don't understand what Brexit was about. It was an exercise to achieve 3 objectives. The exercise was leaving, and the 3 objectives were to take control of money, laws and borders.
Yeah.
We left begrudgingly, but the British establishment has never, ever wanted us to take control of money, laws or borders. So they have done everything to undermine those 3 objectives, and this will do it further. I'm absolutely livid.
Yeah, I've got absolutely no doubt that you're right about all of that. And I see as well an even worse betrayal, because what I see is a conspiracy, effectively, which has been going on probably since before Labour even won the election in July, which is to sort of admit to themselves that, you know, the rejoin argument was gone, that they couldn't really make it anymore because people wouldn't want to go through that whole business of doing another referendum and all the rest of it. So instead of which, they decided to design a sort of re-entry by stealth, if you want, without really telling anyone how that was going to work, without really giving away exactly what would happen, and doing it this sort of really sneakily nasty way, leaving everybody with no option but to have a really, really bad taste in their mouth about it.
Absolutely, and of course, central to all this, and I think I first explored this with you about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Central to all this, of course, is Northern Ireland, because the whole purpose of the Northern Ireland Protocol was to anchor the entire UK back into the orbit of EU rules. That was the linchpin by which the rest of the country would be forced into alignment to make easy the trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And of course, that was the intention, and that will be one of the revelations later on today.
Yeah. Well, who knows what some of the revelations later on today might well be. But I tell you what, we've only just begun, I think. You know, he managed to give away the fishing rights of the country for 12 years before 9 o'clock. You know, they've only been there about 10 minutes by then. So who knows what we're going to get between now and 12:30.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Shocking.
It's
absolutely shocking. Andrew, thanks very much indeed. I think Starmer has gone too far now, says this messenger. This agreement will cause civil unrest, which I don't condone. Thank God for reform. I think people are really quite shocked at how it's gone and how it's happened and how suddenly we wake up, some of you will be waking up now to listen to Julie Hartley-Brewer, and very welcome she is. Very good morning to you.
Are you shocked? I'm not shocked.
I'm quite shocked at how they're doing it, yeah.
I mean, they're always...
I'm quite shocked at how they're doing it.
Keir Starmer told us who he was.
Oh yeah.
He said he was going to undermine Brexit, and he said he'd respect the Brexit referendum, and then didn't. Why would anyone believe him?
Yeah.
Again, it's the abject failure of negotiations. Let's set a date at summit.
Yeah.
So we've kind of got this, and in London as well. So we'll look really humiliated if we don't get one, and then give away everything you can. As far as I can tell, I don't see what's to benefit from.
There's no benefit.
We're going to be able to use e-gates. Actually, it's entirely up to EU countries, and it is now, and it will be in the future. Right. So it's entirely up to the Portuguese will let you through, the Spanish might not.
It's a bogus win anyway, because as I say, every time I go to Europe, I go through the non-EU gate. It's a lot quicker because there's only a few Brits.
My thing is, like, all these people who randomly never had to queue before we Brexited. I mean, really? Because I don't know what countries they're going to. Sometimes there's a queue, sometimes it's not. It's normally down to staffing rather than anything else. I just think this is bizarre. I mean, as Nigel Farage was saying, online, this looks like, giving away. Giving away
fishing.
The fishing industry. And again,